The genesis of the Sisters of Silence traces back to the blood-soaked battlefields of Terra during the Unification Wars, when the Emperor of Mankind began his methodical conquest of humanity's birthworld. As warlords wielding psychic powers and techno-barbarian kings commanded armies across the scarred continents, the Master of Mankind recognized that conventional military might alone would prove insufficient against the growing threat of uncontrolled psykers and the malevolent entities they inevitably attracted from the Immaterium. During the late 29th millennium, as the Emperor's forces pushed deeper into the irradiated wastelands and fortress cities of Terra, encounters with rogue psykers became increasingly frequent and deadly. These untrained wielders of warp energy posed a dual threat. Their uncontrolled abilities could devastate entire regiments, while their psychic emanations acted as beacons for the predatory entities dwelling within the warp. Traditional weapons and tactics proved woefully inadequate against enemies who could boil blood within veins, stop hearts with a thought, or tear reality itself apart with their unrestrained power. The Emperor's solution emerged from his profound understanding of humanity's genetic diversity and the rare mutations that occasionally manifested within the species. Among the scattered populations of Terra existed individuals bearing the Pariah Gene, a genetic anomaly that rendered them soulless in the eyes of the warp. These beings, known as blanks or nulls, possessed an inherent anti-psychic field that actively suppressed warp-based phenomena in their immediate vicinity. Where normal humans appeared as flickering candles of psychic energy to entities from the Immaterium, pariahs existed as voids of absolute darkness, their presence causing profound unease and revulsion in both psykers and demons alike. The recruitment of these genetically unique individuals required extensive searching across Terra's devastated surface. Imperial agents, operating under direct orders from the Emperor himself, scoured the ruins of ancient cities, nomadic tribes wandering the radioactive deserts, and isolated settlements clinging to existence in the planet's most inhospitable regions. The selection process proved extraordinarily challenging, as the Pariah Gene manifested in perhaps one individual among billions, and many potential candidates had already been killed or driven into exile by communities that instinctively feared their unnatural presence. Those identified as possessing the necessary genetic markers underwent rigorous testing to determine the strength of their null-field and their potential for military service. The process involved exposure to controlled psychic phenomena, while Imperial technicians measured the extent of their anti-psychic aura. Candidates demonstrated varying degrees of null ability. Some could merely disrupt minor psychic manifestations, while others possessed fields so powerful they could cause physical pain to nearby psykers and completely negate even the most potent warp-based attacks. The most promising recruits were transported to secure facilities, where they began their transformation from outcasts and wanderers into the Null Maidens, as they were initially designated. The Emperor's vision for these warriors extended far beyond their natural anti-psychic abilities. He envisioned an organization of disciplined, highly trained soldiers who would serve as humanity's ultimate weapon against the growing psychic threats emerging across Terra and eventually the galaxy beyond. The early organizational structure of the Null Maidens reflected the Emperor's methodical approach to warfare and his understanding of the specialized nature of their mission. Rather than integrating these warriors into existing military formations, he established them as a separate organization with their own command hierarchy, training protocols, and operational doctrine. The fledgling sisterhood was placed under the administrative oversight of what would later become the Adeptus Telepathica, though they maintained significant operational autonomy in their day-to-day activities. The initial command structure consisted of veteran warriors drawn from the Emperor's personal guard and selected military commanders who had demonstrated exceptional skill in combating psychic threats during the Unification Wars. These leaders worked closely with Imperial scientists and geneticists to develop training regimens that would maximize the effectiveness of the Null warriors while accounting for their unique physiological and psychological characteristics. The absence of a soul in the traditional sense meant that pariahs experienced the world differently from baseline humans, often displaying emotional detachment and an inability to form conventional social bonds. Training facilities established during this period focused on developing the sisters' natural advantages while addressing their inherent limitations. Physical conditioning emphasized speed, precision, and coordination rather than brute strength, as the Null warriors would rely on their anti-psychic fields and superior tactics rather than overwhelming force to defeat their enemies. Weapons training covered a wide array of Imperial armaments, with particular emphasis on close-quarters combat techniques that would allow the sisters to exploit their null-fields most effectively. The development of specialized equipment began almost immediately, as standard Imperial weaponry proved insufficient for the sisters' unique role. Imperial artificers created custom armor that enhanced the sisters' natural stealth capabilities while providing protection against both conventional and exotic threats. Early weapon designs included modified bolt pistols, power weapons attuned to work in harmony with null fields, and experimental devices that could channel and focus the sisters' anti-psychic abilities into devastating offensive weapons. As the Unification Wars progressed and the Emperor's forces encountered increasingly powerful psykers, the Null Maidens proved their worth in countless engagements across Terra's ravaged surface. Their ability to approach enemy psykers without triggering precognitive warnings made them ideal assassins, while their null fields could protect Imperial forces from psychic attacks that would otherwise prove devastating. Reports from this period describe null warriors walking unharmed through psychic storms that reduced armored vehicles to molten slag, their mere presence causing enemy psykers to collapse in agony as their connection to the warp was severed. The establishment of their fortress convent on Terra marked a crucial milestone in the organization's development. The Emperor personally selected the site, a massive complex built into the bedrock beneath the Himalayan mountains, far from the major population centers, but close enough to the Imperial Palace to ensure rapid deployment when needed. The fortress combined defensive fortifications with training facilities, armories, medical centers, and living quarters designed specifically for the unique needs of the Null warriors. Construction of the fortress convent required innovative engineering solutions to accommodate the sisters' anti-psychic nature. Traditional Imperial technology that relied on psychically attuned machine spirits proved unreliable in the presence of strong null fields, necessitating the development of purely mechanical systems for life support, communications, and defense. The complex included specialized chambers where sisters could practice controlling and focusing their abilities, meditation halls designed to accommodate their particular spiritual needs, and armories stocked with weapons and equipment tailored to anti-psychic warfare. The monastic traditions that would define the Sisters of Silence for millennia began to emerge during this foundational period. Unlike other imperial military organizations, the Sisters developed a culture centered around silence, discipline, and absolute devotion to their mission. The vow of silence that became their defining characteristic originated from practical considerations. Their presence already caused discomfort in normal humans, and their voices carried an unsettling quality that could provoke fear and revulsion even among loyal imperial servants. Daily routines within the fortress convent followed strict patterns that reinforced the sisters' dedication to their calling. Training sessions began before dawn, combining physical conditioning with weapons practice and tactical exercises. Periods of meditation allowed the sisters to explore and refine their connection to their null abilities, learning to modulate the strength of their anti-psychic fields and extend their range when necessary. Equipment maintenance occupied significant portions of their time, as the specialized nature of their gear required constant attention to ensure optimal performance. The sisters' role in combating warp-spawned entities became increasingly important as the Unification Wars drew to a close, and the Emperor began preparations for the Great Crusade. Incidents involving demonic incursions, while rare, demonstrated the catastrophic potential of uncontrolled warp breaches. The Null Maidens proved uniquely effective against such threats, their presence causing lesser demons to weaken and dissipate, while their weapons could inflict permanent harm on entities that laughed off conventional attacks. Intelligence gathered during these early engagements revealed the true scope of the psychic threat facing humanity. Across Terra's surface, hidden cults worshipped entities from the warp. Rogue psykers experimented with forbidden knowledge, and ancient artifacts pulsed with malevolent energy. The Sisters' ability to detect and neutralize these threats made them invaluable assets in the Emperor's efforts to purge Terra of psychic corruption before launching humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The organizational doctrine that emerged during this period emphasized flexibility and adaptability in the face of diverse psychic threats. Small teams of Sisters could operate independently to eliminate isolated targets, while larger formations could support conventional Imperial forces in major engagements. Their training included infiltration techniques, sabotage operations, and coordination with other Imperial military units, ensuring they could fulfill multiple roles as circumstances demanded. As the 30th millennium dawned and the Emperor's attention turned toward the stars, the Sisters of Silence had evolved from a desperate wartime expedient into a sophisticated military organization. Their fortress convent served as both headquarters and symbol of their dedication, while their growing ranks included veterans hardened by years of combat against Terra's most dangerous psychic threats. The monastic warrior traditions that would define their character for the next 10,000 years had taken root, creating a unique military culture that combined absolute loyalty to the Emperor with an unwavering commitment to humanity's protection against the horrors of the warp. The genetic anomaly that defines the Sisters of Silence operates at the most fundamental level of human biology, representing a mutation so rare and profound that it fundamentally alters the bearer's relationship with reality itself. The Pariah Gene, designated by Imperial geneticists as the sigma- mutation, occurs in approximately 1 individual per 10 billion births across the human species. This extraordinary rarity stems from the gene's complex inheritance pattern, requiring specific combinations of recessive alleles that rarely align across multiple generations. The mutation affects the development of the soul during fetal growth, creating individuals who exist as voids within the psychic spectrum, rather than the flickering candles of warp energy that characterize normal human consciousness. Imperial scientific analysis conducted during the late 30th millennium revealed that the Pariah gene directly influences the formation of neural pathways in the developing brain, particularly those regions associated with empathy, emotional bonding, and psychic sensitivity. The mutation causes these areas to develop along radically different patterns, creating neural structures that actively repel warp energy rather than channeling it. Brain scans of confirmed pariahs show distinctive anatomical differences, including enlarged regions associated with spatial awareness and threat detection, while areas governing emotional processing appear significantly reduced compared to baseline human norms. The most immediately observable effect of the Pariah gene manifests as the null-field, an invisible sphere of anti-psychic energy that surrounds every blank to varying degrees. This field operates by creating what Imperial scientists term a negative warp resonance, essentially inverting the normal relationship between real space and the Immaterium within its area of effect. Where normal human souls create tiny eddies and currents in the warp's surface, pariahs generate zones of absolute stillness that actively suppress psychic phenomena. The field strength varies dramatically between individuals, with some blanks producing barely detectable effects, while others generate null zones powerful enough to cause physical pain in nearby psykers. Measurement of null field intensity utilizes the Culexus scale, developed by the Officio Assassinorum to classify pariah operatives according to their anti-psychic potential. The scale ranges from sigma minor designations for individuals with barely perceptible null abilities to sigma major classifications, reserved for the most powerful blanks. Within the Sisters of Silence, recruitment standards require candidates to demonstrate at least sigma standard capabilities, ensuring that all members possess null fields strong enough to reliably disrupt minor psychic manifestations and provide some protection against warp-based attacks. The physiological mechanisms underlying the null field remain incompletely understood even by the Adeptus Mechanicus, most learned geneticists. Current theories suggest that pariah neurons generate a form of negative psychic energy that propagates outward from the individual's nervous system, creating an expanding zone of warp disruption. This energy appears to interact with the quantum vacuum itself, altering the fundamental properties of space-time within the field's boundaries. Psykers entering these zones report sensations of profound wrongness, as if reality itself has become hostile to their existence. Advanced pariahs demonstrate the ability to consciously modulate their null fields, expanding or contracting the affected area through concentration and training. Sisters of Silence undergo extensive conditioning to develop this control, learning to suppress their abilities when stealth requires it or amplify their fields during combat situations. The most skilled practitioners can shape their null zones with remarkable precision, creating corridors of anti-psychic energy that allow them to approach targets while leaving nearby allies unaffected. The psychological impact of possessing the Pariah gene extends far beyond the individual, affecting every aspect of social interaction and emotional development. Blanks experience the world through a fundamentally different perceptual framework, lacking the subtle psychic connections that bind normal humans together in communities and relationships. This absence manifests as an inability to form deep emotional bonds, understand social nuances, or empathize with others' emotional states. While pariahs can learn to mimic appropriate social responses, they remain forever isolated from the unconscious psychic communion that underlies human society. Normal humans instinctively recoil from prolonged contact with blanks, experiencing a range of uncomfortable sensations that intensify with proximity and duration of exposure. These reactions include unexplained anxiety, nausea, headaches, and a persistent feeling that something fundamental is wrong with the pariah's presence. Children and animals display particularly strong negative responses, often crying or fleeing when blanks approach. This biological revulsion serves an evolutionary purpose, as it prevents normal humans from forming close relationships with individuals whose offspring might inherit the pariah gene. The social isolation experienced by blanks begins in early childhood and intensifies throughout their development. Parents of pariah children report feeling disconnected from their offspring, struggling to form the natural emotional bonds that characterize healthy family relationships. Siblings often display hostility or fear toward their blank brothers or sisters, while extended family members find excuses to avoid gatherings where the pariah child will be present. Educational environments prove particularly challenging, as teachers and classmates alike experience discomfort that makes normal learning relationships impossible to establish. Communities that discover pariah individuals among their population typically respond with suspicion, fear, and eventual exile. Historical records from across the galaxy document countless instances of blanks being branded as cursed, possessed, or inherently evil by superstitious populations who lack understanding of their true nature. Some cultures developed elaborate rituals for identifying and removing pariahs from their midst, while others incorporated them into religious or military hierarchies that could benefit from their unique abilities. The immunity to psychic influence that defines blank physiology extends beyond simple resistance to hostile psychic attacks. Pariahs cannot be affected by telepathic communication, empathic manipulation, precognitive warnings, or any form of warp-based mental intrusion. This complete psychic isolation provides tremendous tactical advantages in combat against psykers, as blank operatives can approach their targets without triggering the supernatural awareness that normally alerts psychically sensitive individuals to impending threats. Attempts to use psychic powers directly against blanks result in immediate and often painful feedback for the attacking psyker. The null field disrupts the formation of psychic energy patterns, causing warp-based attacks to collapse back upon their originators with devastating results. Powerful psykers who attempt to overwhelm blank defenses through brute force often suffer severe psychic backlash, including permanent damage to their ability to access the warp. This defensive capability makes even relatively weak blanks extremely dangerous opponents for enemy psykers who lack understanding of their true nature. The gradation of pariah abilities within the Sisters of Silence creates a natural hierarchy that influences operational deployment and tactical roles. Sigma Minor Sisters typically serve in support functions, their limited null fields providing modest protection for equipment and personnel, while remaining weak enough to avoid causing severe discomfort to allied forces. These individuals often excel in technical roles, intelligence gathering, and coordination with conventional Imperial military units, where their presence can be tolerated for extended periods. Sigma Standard operatives form the backbone of the Sisterhood's combat formations, possessing null fields strong enough to reliably disrupt enemy psykers while remaining manageable in group settings. These sisters undergo intensive training in close-quarters combat, weapons handling, and tactical coordination to maximize their effectiveness against psychic threats. Their abilities allow them to operate in small teams that can penetrate enemy defenses, eliminate specific targets, and withdraw before conventional forces can respond effectively. The most powerful members of the Sisterhood carry Sigma major classifications, indicating null fields of extraordinary strength that can cause physical pain to nearby psykers and completely negate even powerful warp-based phenomena. These elite operatives require careful handling due to the intensity of their anti-psychic auras, which can interfere with Imperial equipment and cause severe discomfort to allies. Their deployment focuses on the most dangerous psychic threats, including greater demons, chaos sorcerers, and rogue psykers, whose abilities exceed the capabilities of lesser blanks to counter. Exceptional individuals within the Sisterhood demonstrate null capabilities that approach or match those found within the Culexus Temple of the Officio Assassinorum. These rare sisters possess what Imperial classifications term Omega-level pariah abilities, generating null fields so powerful they can cause instant unconsciousness in nearby psykers and disrupt warp phenomena across vast areas. Such individuals represent the absolute pinnacle of anti-psychic potential within the human species, their abilities rivaling those of the specialized Culexus assassins in raw power, if not in focused application. The relationship between the Sisters of Silence and other Imperial organizations that utilize blank operatives reflects both cooperation and competition for the galaxy's extremely limited supply of pariah individuals. The Culexus Temple maintains the most sophisticated training and augmentation programs for developing blank potential, transforming suitable candidates into living weapons of extraordinary lethality. However, the Temple's requirements are extremely specific, accepting only individuals who demonstrate both powerful null abilities and the psychological profile necessary for solo assassination missions. Coordination between the Sisterhood and Culexus Temple occurs primarily at the highest levels of Imperial command, with both organizations sharing intelligence about emerging psychic threats and occasionally conducting joint operations against targets that require their combined capabilities. The Temple's assassins excel at eliminating specific high-value targets through stealth and precision strikes, while the Sisters provide broader anti-psychic support for conventional military operations. This division of responsibilities prevents direct competition while ensuring that the Imperium can deploy the most appropriate blank assets for each situation. Other Imperial institutions that recruit pariah individuals include certain Inquisition factions, specialized Astra Militarum units, and research divisions within the Adeptus Mechanicus. These organizations typically seek blanks with specific secondary skills or knowledge rather than focusing purely on anti-psychic potential. Competition for suitable candidates remains intense, as the rarity of the Pariah Gene means that every organization must carefully evaluate potential recruits to determine where their abilities can provide maximum benefit to the Imperium's broader strategic objectives. The selection process for determining which organization receives specific pariah candidates involves extensive testing and evaluation by representatives from multiple Imperial institutions. Factors considered include the strength and controllability of the individual's null field, their physical capabilities and psychological profile, existing skills or knowledge that might prove valuable, and the strategic priorities of the various organizations at the time of recruitment. This systematic approach ensures that the Imperium's precious blank resources are allocated efficiently while preventing destructive competition between allied institutions. The transition from Terra's unification to humanity's expansion across the galaxy marked a fundamental shift in the operational scope and strategic importance of the Sisters of Silence. As the Emperor's Great Crusade launched in the early 31st millennium, the Sisterhood found themselves deployed across countless star systems, their anti-psychic capabilities proving essential in humanity's encounters with alien civilizations that wielded powers beyond conventional understanding. The galaxy revealed itself to be saturated with psychic phenomena, from Xenos species that had evolved natural warp manipulation abilities to ancient artifacts pulsing with malevolent energies that could corrupt entire worlds. The integration of Sisters of Silence into Space Marine Legion operations required careful coordination and tactical adaptation from both organizations. Legion commanders, initially skeptical of deploying non-Astartes forces in their campaigns, quickly recognized the invaluable protection the Sisters provided against psychic threats that could devastate even superhuman warriors. The presence of null-fields allowed Space Marines to advance through areas saturated with hostile warp energy, their bolters and chainswords remaining effective where psychic storms would normally render conventional weapons useless. Deployment patterns evolved to maximize the Sisters' effectiveness while accounting for their limited numbers and the discomfort their presence caused among baseline human forces. Small teams of 3 to 5 Sisters typically accompanied Space Marine strike forces, their null-fields creating protective corridors that allowed Astartes warriors to close with enemy psykers. Larger formations of 20 to 30 Sisters operated independently during major compliance actions, tasked with eliminating specific psychic threats or securing areas where warp phenomena posed unacceptable risks to conventional forces. The First Legion's campaigns in the Northern Galactic Spiral provided early examples of effective Sister-Astartes cooperation. During the compliance of the Rangdan systems, Dark Angel's battle brothers found themselves facing Xenos creatures that could phase in and out of reality at will, their exotic abilities rendering standard tactical doctrines ineffective. Sisters of Silence attached to the Legion's expeditionary fleets proved capable of disrupting these phase-shifting abilities, forcing the aliens back into real space where bolter fire and power weapons could reach them. The systematic elimination of Rangdan phase warriors required months of coordinated operations, with sister teams identifying and neutralizing psychic nodes, while Dark Angel's assault companies secured cleared areas. The 15th Legion's encounters with the crystalline entities of the Diasporex revealed another crucial application of anti-psychic warfare. These silicon-based lifeforms communicated through resonant psychic frequencies that could overwhelm unprotected human minds, causing madness and death among Imperial forces attempting to establish communication. Thousand Suns librarians found their own psychic abilities turned against them as the alien harmonics disrupted their connection to the warp. Sisters of Silence provided the solution, their null-fields creating zones of psychic silence where Imperial negotiators could safely interact with Diasporex representatives without risking mental contamination. The compliance of forge worlds and technologically advanced human civilizations often revealed populations that had developed psychic enhancement through technological means. These augmented psykers posed unique challenges, as their abilities combined natural warp manipulation with cybernetic amplification systems that increased their power exponentially. Standard anti-psychic tactics proved insufficient against enemies who could channel their abilities through mechanical interfaces that bypassed normal biological limitations. Sisters of Silence adapted their operational doctrine to counter technologically enhanced psykers through targeted strikes against augmentation systems and psychic amplification networks. Their training expanded to include technical expertise in identifying and disabling cybernetic implants, often requiring precision work with molecular disruptors and electromagnetic pulse weapons. The successful compliance of the Oreshan technocracy demonstrated these evolved tactics, as sister teams infiltrated the planet's primary forge complexes and systematically destroyed the psychic enhancement laboratories that had created armies of augmented battle psykers. Collaboration with the Adeptus Custodes intensified as the Great Crusade encountered increasingly dangerous warp phenomena across the galaxy. The Emperor's personal guardians possessed their own methods for combating psychic threats, but their small numbers and dedication to protecting the Master of Mankind limited their availability for extended operations. Sisters of Silence filled this gap, providing anti-psychic support for custodian forces when the Emperor's presence required additional protection against supernatural threats. Joint operations between sisters and custodians typically involved the investigation and containment of artifacts or locations that posed direct threats to the Emperor's safety. Ancient Xeno's ruins often contained psychic resonance chambers that could theoretically be used to target the Master of Mankind across vast distances, requiring immediate neutralization by combined Imperial forces. The precision and discipline of custodian warriors complemented the sisters' anti-psychic abilities perfectly, creating strike teams capable of operating in environments where both conventional and supernatural threats demanded simultaneous attention. The discovery of pre-Age of Strife human colonies that had survived through pacts with warp entities presented some of the most challenging compliance actions of the Great Crusade. These populations had often developed sophisticated understanding of demonic hierarchies and summoning rituals, creating defensive networks that combined human ingenuity with supernatural power. Conventional Imperial forces found themselves facing enemies who could predict their movements through divination, turn their weapons against them through possession, and summon reinforcements from the warp itself. Sisters of Silence proved essential in breaking these demon-protected strongholds, their null-fields disrupting summoning circles and severing the connection between human cultists and their otherworldly patrons. The compliance of the Sarash system required extensive coordination between sister formations and multiple Space Marine legions, as the human defenders had transformed their worlds into massive ritual sites designed to channel demonic power. Systematic destruction of these installations took months of careful work, with sisters identifying and neutralizing psychic focal points, while Legion forces secured the surrounding areas against conventional counterattacks. The containment of dangerous warp phenomena discovered during exploration operations became a specialized mission profile for the Sisterhood. Ancient battlefields where massive psychic conflicts had occurred often retained residual warp energy that could spontaneously manifest as hostile entities or reality distortions. These psychic scars posed ongoing threats to Imperial shipping lanes and colonization efforts, requiring permanent monitoring and occasional active intervention to prevent catastrophic manifestations. Sister teams assigned to containment duties operated from heavily shielded monitoring stations, positioned at safe distances from identified warp anomalies. Their null-fields provided early warning systems for increasing psychic activity, while specialized equipment allowed them to measure and track changes in local warp resonance patterns. When containment protocols failed and active manifestations occurred, these teams served as the first line of defense, buying time for heavier Imperial forces to respond, while preventing the spread of warp contamination to nearby systems. The recovery and secure transport of psychically active artifacts required the development of new protocols and specialized equipment. Many worlds conquered during the Great Crusade contained relics from previous civilizations, devices that channeled warp energy for various purposes, often with unpredictable and dangerous side effects. Standard Imperial procedure called for the destruction of such items, but the potential intelligence value of studying alien psychic technology made selective recovery desirable in certain circumstances. Sisters of Silence became the primary agents for artifact recovery operations, their null-fields providing the only reliable method for safely handling items that could drive normal humans insane through proximity alone. Specialized containment vessels lined with null-field generators allowed the transport of these artifacts to secure research facilities, where Mechanicus adepts could study them under carefully controlled conditions. The Sisters' role extended beyond simple transport, as they provided security for research installations and served as emergency response teams when containment failures occurred. The encounter with the lair species during the Third Legion's compliance operations demonstrated the Sisters' effectiveness against Xenos that had evolved natural psychic abilities. These serpentine aliens possessed sophisticated telepathic networks that allowed instantaneous communication across their entire civilization, making conventional military tactics ineffective against enemies who could coordinate their responses faster than Imperial forces could adapt. Emperor's children battle brothers found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by foes who seemed to anticipate their every action. Sisters of Silence attached to the Third Legion's expeditionary fleet provided the solution by systematically disrupting lair telepathic networks through targeted strikes against psychic relay nodes. Their null-fields created dead zones in the alien communication system, forcing the lair to rely on slower conventional methods of coordination. This tactical advantage allowed the Emperor's children to exploit gaps in enemy responses and achieve decisive victories against previously unbeatable opponents. The investigation of derelict spacecraft discovered during exploration operations often revealed evidence of psychic disasters that had befallen previous crews. Ghost ships drifting through the void frequently contained residual warp energy that could possess or corrupt anyone who boarded them without proper protection. Standard Imperial salvage teams required extensive psychic shielding and spiritual purification rituals before attempting to explore such vessels, processes that were time-consuming and often ineffective against powerful supernatural contamination. Sisters of Silence could board and investigate these derelict vessels with minimal risk, their null-fields providing natural protection against possessing entities and psychic traps left behind by previous occupants. Their investigations often revealed valuable intelligence about alien civilizations, lost human colonies, or warp phenomena that posed ongoing threats to Imperial shipping. The systematic exploration of the Morty's fleet, a collection of over 200 derelict vessels discovered in the Ghoul stars, required months of careful work by sister teams, ultimately revealing evidence of a Xeno species that had achieved technological transcendence before being consumed by their own psychic experiments. Training programs for the Sisterhood expanded significantly during the Great Crusade to address the diverse range of psychic threats encountered across the galaxy. Traditional anti-psyker combat techniques proved insufficient against alien species whose abilities operated according to fundamentally different principles than human warp manipulation. Sisters learned to identify and counter crystalline resonance psykers, bioelectric field manipulators, quantum probability shapers, and dozens of other exotic psychic phenomena that defied conventional understanding. The establishment of forward operating bases on conquered worlds allowed the Sisterhood to maintain rapid response capabilities across the expanding Imperial frontier. These facilities served as staging areas for anti-psychic operations, while providing secure locations for the containment and study of captured artifacts or specimens. Each base included specialized detention facilities designed to hold psychically active prisoners, research laboratories equipped with null-field generators, and communication arrays that could coordinate with other Imperial forces across multiple star systems. The Sisters' reputation as humanity's ultimate weapon against psychic threats spread throughout the Great Crusade fleets, leading to increased requests for their deployment in particularly dangerous compliance actions. Legion commanders who had initially viewed them as unnecessary support elements began actively requesting sister attachments for operations involving suspected psychic opposition. This growing demand strained the Sisterhood's limited numbers, forcing careful prioritization of deployment assignments based on threat assessment and strategic importance. The coordination between different imperial organizations during major compliance actions required extensive planning and communication to prevent conflicts between competing operational doctrines. Sisters of Silence found themselves working alongside Mechanicus Tech, adepts investigating alien technology, Imperial Army reconnaissance units mapping enemy positions, and Space Marine assault companies preparing for direct confrontation. Each organization brought its own protocols and priorities, creating complex command structures that required diplomatic skill as well as military expertise to navigate successfully. The discovery of human populations that had developed stable psychic mutations during their isolation from Terra presented unique challenges for Imperial compliance doctrine. These variant humans often possessed abilities that could benefit the Imperium while remaining loyal to the Emperor's vision of human unity. However, their psychic nature made them potential security risks that required careful evaluation and monitoring. Sisters of Silence played crucial roles in these assessments, their null-fields allowing safe interaction with psychically active populations, while their expertise in anti-psychic warfare provided accurate threat evaluations. The gathering that would forever alter the relationship between the Imperium and psychic power began in the early decades of the 31st millennium, when reports of increasingly dangerous incidents involving Space Marine librarians reached the Emperor's attention on Terra. Across the expanding frontiers of the Great Crusade, Astartes psykers had begun delving deeper into forbidden knowledge, their pursuit of power leading to catastrophic warp breaches, demonic possessions, and the corruption of entire companies. The Emperor's growing concern about these developments culminated in his decision to convene the Council of Nicaea on the world of the same name, bringing together representatives from across the Imperium to debate the future of sanctioned psychic powers within his domain. The Sisters of Silence received their summons to attend the council through encrypted communications delivered directly from the Imperial Palace. Their role would extend beyond mere attendance. They were to serve as living demonstrations of humanity's capacity to exist without dependence on warp-based abilities, while their presence would ensure that the proceedings remained free from psychic manipulation or interference. The selection of sisters to accompany the delegation required careful consideration, as their null-fields needed to be strong enough to maintain psychic neutrality throughout the debates without causing debilitating discomfort to the assembled Primarchs and their retinues. The fortress world of Nicaea had been chosen specifically for its strategic location and defensive capabilities, situated far from major warp routes to minimize the risk of demonic intrusion during the sensitive discussions. The planet's primary amphitheater, carved from black volcanic stone, provided a suitably imposing venue for debates that would determine the fate of psychic disciplines across the Imperium. As delegations from across the galaxy converged on Nicaea, the Sisters established discrete observation positions throughout the complex, their presence creating overlapping fields of anti-psychic energy that blanketed the entire facility. The opening ceremonies revealed the profound divisions that existed within the Imperium regarding the use of psychic powers. Magnus, the Red of the Thousand Suns, arrived with a retinue of his most accomplished sorcerers, their ornate armor gleaming with protective wards and psychic amplification devices. In stark contrast, Mortarion of the Death Guard brought representatives who viewed all warp-based abilities as inherently corrupting, their disgust for psychic manipulation evident in their hostile glares toward the Thousand Suns delegation. Between these extremes stood moderates like Jagatai Khan of the White Scars, whose shamanic traditions incorporated limited psychic practices that had served his legion well during compliance operations. The sisters observed these preliminary interactions with professional detachment, noting how their null fields affected different attendees in varying ways. The Thousand Suns contingent displayed visible discomfort in their presence, several sorcerers requiring medical attention as their psychic abilities were disrupted by proximity to the anti-psychic auras. Mortarion's warriors, conversely, seemed to find the sisters' presence reassuring, viewing them as validation of their belief that humanity could thrive without dependence on warp-based powers. The Primarchs themselves showed more subtle reactions, their superhuman physiology allowing them to function normally despite the psychic dampening effects surrounding the amphitheater. As formal debates commenced, the sisters' role shifted from passive observation to active enforcement of the Emperor's will regarding psychic neutrality during the proceedings. Several attempts by various factions to employ subtle telepathic influence or empathic manipulation were immediately detected and countered by the Null-Fields, ensuring that arguments would be decided on their merits rather than through supernatural coercion. The presence of the sisters served as a constant reminder that the Emperor possessed alternatives to psychic power, embodying his vision of humanity's potential for advancement through discipline and technology rather than warp manipulation. The testimony phase of the council brought forth witnesses from across the Immaterium, each presenting evidence supporting their position on the psychic question. Representatives from the Adeptus Telepathica argued for the essential nature of sanctioned psykers in maintaining communication across the galaxy, while Mechanicus Tech adepts presented data on the technological alternatives that could replace psychic abilities in many applications. The sisters' own commanding officers provided detailed reports on their successes against psychic threats, demonstrating that anti-psychic forces could effectively counter even the most powerful warp-wielding enemies. The most dramatic moments of the council occurred when Magnus, the Red, attempted to demonstrate the beneficial applications of psychic power through carefully controlled exhibitions of sorcery. His efforts to showcase protective wards, enhanced communication abilities, and battlefield divination were systematically disrupted by the sisters' Null-Fields, causing his demonstrations to fail spectacularly before the assembled delegates. The humiliation of seeing his most trusted abilities rendered impotent by the mere presence of the silent warriors served to underscore the Emperor's point about humanity's capacity to function without dependence on the warp. Mortarion seized upon these failures to press his argument for the complete elimination of psychic disciplines within the Space Marine legions. His passionate speeches about the corrupting influence of warp power resonated with many attendees who had witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by psychic accidents during the Great Crusade. The Death Guard Primarch pointed to the sisters as proof that humans could not only survive without psychic abilities, but could actually excel in combat against supernatural threats through proper training and equipment. The Emperor's own interventions during the debates revealed his complex relationship with psychic power and the difficult balance he sought to maintain between utility and safety. His acknowledgement of the sisters' effectiveness against demonic threats validated their role within the imperial hierarchy, while simultaneously demonstrating the limitations of purely anti-psychic approaches to galactic governance. The Master of Mankind's obvious respect for the Sisterhood's capabilities provided them with unprecedented visibility and influence within the broader Imperial command structure. As the Council progressed through its various phases, the sisters found themselves increasingly involved in behind-the-scenes security operations. Intelligence reports indicated that several factions were attempting to influence the proceedings through covert means, including the deployment of psychic agents and the smuggling of warp-tainted artifacts into the conference facility. Sister teams conducted systematic sweeps of the complex, their Null-Fields revealing hidden psychic signatures and disrupting attempts at supernatural surveillance or manipulation. The investigation of suspected infiltrators required the sisters to coordinate closely with other Imperial security agencies, including elements of the nascent Inquisition and specialized custodian guard units assigned to protect the Emperor's person. These joint operations provided valuable experience in multi-agency cooperation while demonstrating the sisters' utility in counterintelligence roles. Their ability to detect and neutralize psychic threats made them indispensable partners for organizations that lacked sufficient anti-psychic capabilities of their own. The formal announcement of the Edict of Nicaea marked the culmination of months of debate and deliberation. The Emperor's decree banned the use of psychic powers by Space Marine legions, while maintaining the necessity of sanctioned psykers for essential imperial functions such as astropathic communication and navigational guidance. The sisters' presence during the announcement ceremony served as a powerful symbol of the alternatives available to humanity, their silent ranks representing the discipline and dedication required to serve the Immaterium without relying on warp-based abilities. The immediate aftermath of the edict's proclamation revealed the deep divisions that the council had failed to resolve. Magnus the Red departed Nicaea in obvious anger, his 1,000 sons contingent making little effort to conceal their displeasure with the emperor's decision. Other Primarchs expressed varying degrees of acceptance or resistance to the new restrictions, with some privately questioning whether the complete elimination of librarian departments would weaken their legion's effectiveness against psychic threats encountered during compliance operations. The implementation phase of the Edict of Nicaea required the sisters to take on new responsibilities as enforcement agents for the Emperor's anti-psychic policies. Their deployment to Space Marine fleet bases and fortress worlds served multiple purposes. They provided expertise in identifying and containing psychic violations, while their presence served as a constant reminder of the Emperor's commitment to the new restrictions. The transition from advisory roles to active enforcement represented a significant expansion of the Sisterhood's authority within the imperial hierarchy. The systematic dismantling of librarian departments across the 18 Space Marine legions proceeded at different rates depending on each Primarch's attitude toward the edict. Legions like the Death Guard and Iron Hands, whose leadership had supported the psychic restrictions, moved quickly to transfer their librarians to other roles or return them to Terra for reassignment. Others, particularly the White Scars and Space Wolves, implemented the changes more gradually, while seeking ways to maintain their traditional practices within the letter, if not the spirit of the new regulations. The Thousand Sons presented the most significant challenge to edict enforcement, as their entire organizational structure revolved around the systematic development and application of psychic abilities. Magnus the Red's initial attempts to comply with the restrictions while maintaining his legion's effectiveness led to increasingly creative interpretations of the edict's language. Sister observers assigned to monitor Thousand Sons' activities reported numerous incidents of questionable compliance, including the use of psychic disciplines disguised as advanced tactical analysis and warp-based communication systems classified as technological innovations. The White Scar's interpretation of the edict proved equally problematic, as Jagatai Khan argued that his legion's shamanic practices predated their integration into the Immaterium and therefore fell outside the scope of the new restrictions. The Primarch's contention that his warriors' abilities represented cultural traditions rather than psychic disciplines created legal ambiguities that required careful investigation by sister teams assigned to monitor compliance. Their reports documented the use of what appeared to be psychic powers during combat operations, though the White Scars consistently maintained that these abilities stemmed from spiritual practices rather than warp manipulation. The Space Wolves presented perhaps the most complex enforcement challenge, as Leman Russ openly declared that his legion's rune priests operated according to principles fundamentally different from those employed by other librarians. The Wolf King's assertion that his warriors drew power from Fenris itself, rather than the warp, created theological and practical difficulties for enforcement teams attempting to determine whether specific practices violated the edict's provisions. Sister observers found themselves caught between their mandate to enforce psychic restrictions and the political reality of challenging a Primarch's interpretation of his own legion's abilities. Tensions between the Sisterhood and various Space Marine legions intensified as enforcement operations expanded across the galaxy. Many Astartes commanders viewed the Sisters' presence as an implicit challenge to their authority and competence, particularly when Null-Fields disrupted equipment or caused discomfort among their personnel. The cultural differences between the monastic, disciplined sisterhood and the warrior brotherhood traditions of the Space Marines created friction that required careful management to prevent open conflicts between allied imperial forces. The Iron Warriors' response to edict enforcement demonstrated how compliance could be achieved while maintaining operational effectiveness. Perdurabo's systematic approach to reorganizing his legion's structure eliminated obvious psychic disciplines, while incorporating the Sisters' anti-psychic expertise into his siege warfare doctrines. The Primarch's recognition of the Sisters' tactical value led to extensive cooperation between his forces and sisterhood units, creating joint operational protocols that would influence Imperial military doctrine for centuries to come. The discovery of covert psychic training programs within supposedly compliant legions required the Sisters to develop new investigative techniques and surveillance methods. These hidden schools often operated under the guise of advanced tactical training or spiritual development programs, making detection difficult without extensive observation and analysis. Sister teams learned to identify subtle signs of psychic activity, including unusual equipment configurations, suspicious personnel transfers, and anomalous energy readings that suggested ongoing warp manipulation. The enforcement of the edict extended beyond the Space Marine legions to include other Imperial military organizations that employed psychic operatives. Imperial army regiments that had incorporated battle psykers into their command structures required careful evaluation to determine which practices violated the new restrictions and which remained permissible under existing regulations. The Sisters' expertise in anti-psychic warfare made them valuable consultants for commanders seeking to maintain operational effectiveness while ensuring compliance with the Emperor's directives. The psychological impact of the edict's enforcement created unexpected challenges for Imperial military operations across the galaxy. Many commanders had become dependent on psychic support for tactical intelligence, communication, and battlefield coordination, leaving them struggling to adapt to purely conventional methods of warfare. The Sisters found themselves serving as advisors and trainers, helping Imperial forces develop alternative approaches to problems that had previously been solved through psychic means. The resistance encountered during enforcement operations revealed the depth of attachment that many Imperial servants felt towards psychic disciplines. Arguments for maintaining existing practices ranged from practical concerns about operational effectiveness to philosophical objections based on the perceived hypocrisy of restricting some psychic abilities while maintaining others. The Sisters' role as enforcers placed them at the center of these debates, requiring them to defend policies that many viewed as arbitrary or counterproductive. The irony inherent in the Sisterhood's position became increasingly apparent as enforcement operations continued across the galaxy. Their own anti-psychic abilities represented a form of warp manipulation, albeit one that operated in opposition to conventional psychic phenomena rather than in harmony with them. Critics pointed out that the Emperor's reliance on the Sisters to enforce anti-psychic policies demonstrated the impossibility of completely eliminating supernatural elements from Imperial military operations, undermining the philosophical foundations of the edict itself. The enforcement of the Edict of Nicaea reached its most violent and decisive expression in the early years of the 31st millennium, when intelligence reports reached Terra detailing Magnus, the Red's catastrophic breach of the Emperor's psychic prohibitions. The Thousand Sons Primarch's use of sorcery to warn the Master of Mankind about Horus's treachery had shattered the psychic barriers protecting the Imperial Palace, allowing demonic entities to pour through the breach and wreak havoc within the Emperor's own sanctum. The magnitude of this violation demanded immediate and overwhelming response, leading to the deployment of the 6th Legion Space Wolves alongside their most effective anti-psychic support, the Sisters of Silence. The selection of forces for the Prospero operation reflected the Emperor's determination to demonstrate the consequences of defying his edicts regarding psychic power. Leman Russ received orders to bring Magnus back to Terra to answer for his crimes, with the clear understanding that resistance would be met with total destruction. The Space Wolves' natural antipathy toward sorcery made them ideal candidates for the mission, while their Rune Priest's abilities would theoretically remain unaffected by the anti-psychic measures required to neutralize Thousand Sons' battle magic. The inclusion of Sisters of Silence contingents served multiple strategic purposes. Their null-fields would disrupt enemy sorcery, while providing protection for Imperial forces against psychic counterattacks. The Adeptus Custodes deployment added another layer of authority and lethality to the expedition. Constantin Valdor personally led a force of 300 custodian guards, their presence indicating the Emperor's direct involvement in the operation, despite his physical absence from the battlefield. The coordination between custodians, space wolves, and Sisters of Silence required extensive planning to ensure that the different organizations could operate effectively together, despite their vastly different tactical doctrines and command structures. The Sisterhood's contribution to the Prospero expedition numbered approximately 800 warriors drawn from multiple convents across the galaxy. This represented one of the largest single deployments of Sisters of Silence since the organization's founding, reflecting both the severity of the threat posed by the Thousand Sons and the unique challenges expected during operations against a legion of accomplished sorcerers. The selected sisters included veterans of anti-psychic campaigns across the Great Crusade, their experience with diverse forms of warp manipulation making them invaluable assets for countering the sophisticated battle magic employed by Magnus's forces. The journey to Prospero required careful coordination of fleet movements to ensure that all Imperial forces arrived simultaneously and in sufficient strength to overwhelm any resistance. The Space Wolves' battle barges and strike cruisers formed the expedition's primary assault element, while custodian vessels provided command and control capabilities, along with specialized equipment for containing psychically active prisoners. The sisters traveled aboard dedicated transport ships equipped with null-field generators and specialized holding cells designed to neutralize captured sorcerers during the return journey to Terra. Intelligence briefings conducted during the voyage revealed the extent of Prospero's transformation into a fortress world dedicated to psychic research and sorceress experimentation. The planet's primary city of Tizca had been rebuilt according to Magnus's vision of perfect harmony between architecture and warp-based energy flows, creating a metropolis that served as a massive amplification array for psychic phenomena. The Thousand Sons had constructed pyramid-shaped libraries and research facilities throughout the city, each building designed to channel and focus psychic energy according to principles that violated every tenet of the Edict of Nicaea. The tactical challenges posed by Prospero's defenses required innovative approaches that combined conventional military assault techniques with specialized anti-psychic operations. The Thousand Sons had surrounded their world with orbital monitoring stations that could detect approaching vessels through psychic divination, making surprise attacks virtually impossible against enemies who possessed precognitive abilities. The sisters' null-fields offered the only reliable method for approaching these installations without triggering supernatural early warning systems, though their limited numbers meant that only selected strike forces could benefit from this protection. The initial assault phase began with coordinated strikes against Prospero's orbital defenses, as Space Wolves boarding parties accompanied by sister teams fought their way through battle stations crewed by Thousand Sons sorcerers and their human auxiliaries. The confined spaces of spacecraft corridors proved ideal for exploiting the sisters' anti-psychic advantages, as enemy psykers found their abilities severely disrupted by proximity to null-fields, while Imperial forces could engage them with conventional weapons. The systematic elimination of orbital installations proceeded rapidly once the defenders lost their supernatural advantages, clearing the way for the main assault on the planet's surface. The planetary bombardment that preceded the ground invasion demonstrated the Space Wolves' commitment to total destruction of Prospero's sorceress infrastructure. Leman Russ had received explicit authorization to employ cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs if necessary to ensure that no trace of the Thousand Sons' forbidden knowledge survived the operation. However, the need to capture Magnus alive for transport to Terra required precision strikes that would eliminate military targets while preserving key locations where the Primarch might be found. The sisters' intelligence regarding psychic focal points and amplification arrays proved invaluable in selecting bombardment targets that would maximize disruption of enemy sorcery. The deployment of ground forces revealed the full scope of the tactical coordination required for successful anti-psychic operations. Sister formations advanced alongside Space Wolves' assault companies, their null-fields creating corridors of psychic disruption that allowed the Astartes warriors to approach enemy positions without triggering defensive sorcery. The Thousand Suns battle doctrine relied heavily on devastating psychic attacks that could incinerate entire squads or turn their weapons against them through telekinetic manipulation. The presence of null-fields forced them to rely on conventional tactics for which they were poorly prepared, having neglected traditional combat training in favor of developing their sorceress abilities. The assault on Tizca's outer districts proceeded with systematic efficiency as Imperial forces exploited their tactical advantages against psychically dependent defenders. Space Wolves' Grey Hunters advanced behind sister screening forces, their bolters and chainswords proving devastatingly effective against enemies who could no longer rely on precognitive warnings or psychic shields for protection. The Thousand Suns' elaborate defensive positions, designed to channel and amplify psychic energy, became death traps when null-fields disrupted the very phenomena they were meant to exploit. The encounter with Thousand Suns' Rubric Marines revealed the extent of Magnus's violations of the Edict of Nicaea and the horrific consequences of uncontrolled sorceress experimentation. These warriors had been transformed by a massive psychic ritual intended to protect them from mutation, but the spell had instead reduced most of them to animated suits of armor controlled by the spirits of their former occupants. The sisters' null-fields caused these entities to flicker and weaken, their connection to their physical forms becoming unstable in the presence of anti-psychic energy. Space Wolves warriors found that Rubric Marines exposed to null-fields for extended periods would simply collapse as their animating spirits were severed from the material plane. The coordination between different Imperial forces required constant communication and tactical adjustment as the battle progressed through Tizca's complex urban environment. Custodian Guard squads operated independently, their superior equipment and training allowing them to engage Thousand Suns sorcerers directly without requiring sister support. However, their small numbers meant that they focused on high-value targets while leaving the bulk of enemy forces to be handled by Space Wolves and sister formations. The different combat doctrines and command structures of the three organizations created coordination challenges that required flexible leadership and clear communication protocols. The systematic destruction of Prospero's great libraries represented one of the most controversial aspects of the operation, as these repositories contained thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about psychic phenomena and warp-based technologies. The sisters' role in identifying and neutralizing psychically active texts and artifacts proved essential, as many of the library's contents were protected by defensive spells that could kill or corrupt anyone who attempted to handle them without proper protection. Null-fields allowed Imperial forces to safely approach these dangerous materials, though the ultimate fate of most items was destruction rather than preservation. The battle for the Pyramid of Phodop, Magnus's personal fortress and the center of Thousand Suns' power on Prospero, required the concentrated efforts of all Imperial forces participating in the operation. The massive structure had been designed as a psychic amplification device of unprecedented power, its crystalline walls and geometric architecture channeling warp energy from across the planet into focused streams that could devastate entire armies. The sisters' approach to the pyramid caused visible distortions in its energy patterns, the null-fields disrupting carefully calibrated resonance frequencies and causing structural instabilities throughout the building. The infiltration of the pyramid's lower levels revealed chambers filled with forbidden artifacts and experimental equipment that violated every principle of safe psychic research. Sister teams worked methodically through these areas, their null-fields neutralizing active experiments and rendering dangerous artifacts inert for later examination or destruction. The discovery of demonic summoning circles and bound warp entities confirmed the worst fears about the Thousand Sons' descent into heretical practices, providing justification for the Emperor's decision to authorize the complete destruction of their legion. The confrontation between Magnus the Red and the assembled Imperial forces demonstrated both the power of coordinated anti-psychic tactics and the limitations inherent in relying solely on null-fields against enemies of extraordinary ability. The Thousand Sons' Primarch's psychic might far exceeded that of normal sorcerers, his connection to the warp allowing him to manifest phenomena that could overwhelm even the strongest null-fields through sheer magnitude. However, the presence of multiple sister formations created overlapping zones of psychic disruption that forced Magnus to expend enormous amounts of energy to maintain his abilities, weakening him for the final confrontation with Leman Russ. The battle's climactic phase saw Magnus attempting to use his sorceress powers to transport surviving Thousand Sons off Prospero through mass teleportation rituals. The sisters' coordinated response involved surrounding the primary teleportation sites with concentrated null fields, disrupting the delicate psychic matrices required for such complex spells. Many Thousand Sons warriors found themselves trapped between dimensions as their escape routes collapsed, while others materialized in locations far from their intended destinations. The systematic disruption of evacuation attempts ensured that few members of the Legion escaped to threaten Imperial forces in future engagements. The casualties sustained by the Sisters of Silence during the Prospero operation reflected both the intensity of the fighting and the specific dangers posed by enemies desperate to break free from anti-psychic containment. Approximately 130 sisters were killed during the campaign, with many more suffering injuries from psychic backlash as enemy sorcerers attempted to overwhelm their null fields through brute force attacks. The loss rate, while significant, remained within acceptable parameters for an operation of such scope and importance, demonstrating the effectiveness of their training and equipment against even the most dangerous psychic opponents. The aftermath of Prospero's burning revealed the strategic impact of successful anti-psychic operations on Imperial military doctrine. The systematic destruction of a Space Marine Legion that had violated the Edict of Nicaea sent a clear message to other organizations about the consequences of defying the Emperor's will regarding psychic disciplines. The Sisters' crucial role in achieving this victory elevated their status within the Imperial hierarchy, while validating their tactical doctrines and equipment designs for future operations against psychic threats. The intelligence gathered during the operation provided valuable insights into the advanced sorceress techniques employed by the Thousand Sons and the potential threats posed by other organizations that might be conducting similar research. Sister teams documented hundreds of spell formulae, summoning rituals, and psychic amplification devices, creating a comprehensive database of forbidden knowledge that would prove invaluable for future counter-sorcery operations. The careful analysis of captured materials revealed connections to other rogue psyker organizations across the galaxy, providing targets for subsequent enforcement actions. The coordination protocols developed during the Prospero campaign became the foundation for future joint operations between Sisters of Silence, Space Marine Legions, and other Imperial military organizations. The successful integration of anti-psychic specialists with conventional forces demonstrated the potential for combined arms approaches to supernatural threats, leading to the development of standardized procedures for similar operations. The lessons learned about communication, command structures, and tactical coordination would influence Imperial military doctrine for the remainder of the Great Crusade and beyond. The political ramifications of Prospero's destruction extended far beyond the immediate military consequences, as news of the operation spread throughout the galaxy and reached other Space Marine legions that had been less than enthusiastic about implementing the Edict of Nicaea. The complete annihilation of the Thousand Suns served as a powerful deterrent against further violations of psychic restrictions, while simultaneously demonstrating the Emperor's commitment to enforcing his will regardless of the political or strategic costs involved. The sisters' visible role in achieving this victory reinforced their position as the Emperor's chosen instruments for combating psychic threats across his domain. The catastrophic breach that shattered Magnus the Red's psychic warning to the Emperor created consequences far beyond the immediate demonic incursion into the Imperial Palace. The Thousand Suns Primarch's desperate attempt to alert his father to Horus's treachery had torn through the carefully constructed barriers protecting the Emperor's most ambitious project, the Imperial Webway. This ancient network of tunnels through the warp, originally created by the Eldar at the height of their civilization, represented humanity's potential salvation from dependence on warp travel and the constant threat of demonic possession that accompanied it. The Emperor had spent decades secretly excavating and reinforcing sections of the webway beneath Terra, creating a human-controlled gateway that could eventually span the entire galaxy. The psychic shockwave from Magnus's breach had not merely damaged the webway's protective barriers, it had obliterated them entirely across vast sections of the network. Ancient seals that had held for millions of years cracked and failed, allowing the raw stuff of the warp to pour directly into the carefully constructed tunnels. Demons of every description flooded through the gaps, transforming the Emperor's greatest hope for humanity's future into a nightmarish battleground where reality itself became fluid and unpredictable. The sublevels of the Imperial Palace, once secure administrative and storage areas, became the front lines of a war that would determine whether Terra itself could survive the growing tide of chaos. The Emperor's immediate response to this catastrophe required him to abandon his physical form and assume a position on the Golden Throne, the arcane device that served as both life support system and psychic amplifier. From this position, he could project his immense psychic power directly into the breached webway, holding back the worst of the demonic incursion through sheer force of will. However, this solution came at an enormous cost. The master of mankind could no longer lead his armies in person, and his attention became focused entirely on maintaining the psychic barriers that prevented Terra from being consumed by the warp itself. The deployment of Imperial forces into the webway required unprecedented coordination between multiple organizations, each bringing specialized capabilities essential for survival in an environment where conventional military doctrine proved inadequate. The Adeptus Custodes formed the backbone of the defensive effort, their superior equipment and training making them capable of sustained combat against demonic entities that could tear apart normal humans with casual ease. However, even the Emperor's personal guardians found themselves struggling against enemies that could ignore physical laws and manifest abilities that defied rational understanding. The Legio Cybernetica provided heavy support in the form of battle automata that could operate effectively in environments where human crews would be driven insane by exposure to warp phenomena. These robotic warriors, controlled by tech adepts operating from shielded command posts, brought devastating firepower to bear against demonic hordes while remaining immune to the psychological warfare that formed a crucial component of chaos tactics. Castlak's battle automata advanced through webway tunnels with methodical precision, their bolt cannons and power fists reducing lesser demons to ethereal fragments, while their lack of souls made them invisible to many forms of supernatural detection. The inclusion of Sisters of Silence in the webway defense force represented a strategic decision of extraordinary importance. Their null-fields provided the only reliable method for disrupting the constant warp phenomena that plagued the tunnels, creating zones of relative stability where Imperial forces could regroup and resupply. The Sisters' anti-psychic abilities proved even more valuable in the webway than in conventional battlefields, as the environment itself was saturated with psychic energy that could overwhelm unprotected minds within minutes of exposure. Their presence allowed other Imperial forces to operate in areas that would otherwise be completely uninhabitable for normal humans. The tactical deployment of sister formations within the webway required careful consideration of their limited numbers and the vast scope of the defensive perimeter that needed to be maintained. Small teams of 3 to 5 sisters were positioned at critical junction points throughout the tunnel network, their null-fields creating anchor points of stability that prevented the complete collapse of Imperial defensive lines. Larger formations of 20 to 30 sisters operated as mobile reserves, responding to breakthrough attempts by particularly powerful demonic entities that could overwhelm local defenses through sheer supernatural might. The nature of combat within the webway defied conventional military understanding, as battles were fought in environments where gravity might reverse without warning, time could flow backward or accelerate unpredictably, and the very ground beneath combatants' feet might transform into writhing masses of demonic flesh. The sisters' null-fields provided crucial protection against these reality distortions, creating bubbles of normal space-time where Imperial weapons functioned reliably and tactical coordination remained possible. Without this protection, even the most disciplined custodian guards found themselves disoriented and vulnerable to attacks that exploited the malleable nature of warp-touched reality. The variety of demonic entities encountered within the breached webway reflected the complete breakdown of barriers between the material universe and the realm of chaos. Lesser demons poured through the gaps in endless streams, their numbers replenished faster than Imperial forces could destroy them. These creatures ranged from the blade-armed bloodletters of Khorne to the disease-ridden plague-bearers of Nurgle, each type requiring different tactical approaches and specialized weapons to eliminate effectively. The Sisters' Flamers proved particularly effective against Nurgle's servants, the purifying flames enhanced by their null-fields to burn away both physical form and demonic essence simultaneously. Greater demons presented challenges that required concentrated efforts from multiple Imperial organizations working in perfect coordination. These entities possessed power levels that approached those of Primarchs, their abilities allowing them to reshape local reality according to their will while commanding lesser demons with absolute authority. The appearance of a great unclean one in the primary junction chamber beneath the palace required the combined efforts of 50 custodian guards, 2 Legio Cybernetica maniples, and an entire company of Sisters of Silence to contain and eventually banish back to the warp. The battle lasted for 6 hours of continuous combat, with the Sisters' null-fields preventing the demon from regenerating its wounds, while custodian power weapons carved away portions of its bloated form. The coordination between different Imperial forces operating in the webway required the development of new communication protocols and tactical procedures. Standard Vox equipment frequently malfunctioned in the presence of warp phenomena, forcing commanders to rely on visual signals and pre-arranged movement patterns to coordinate their forces. The Sisters' training in silent communication proved invaluable in these circumstances, as their hand signals and body language could convey complex tactical information without relying on potentially compromised electronic systems. Their ability to operate effectively without verbal communication became a model that other Imperial forces attempted to emulate with varying degrees of success. The supply and logistics challenges posed by extended operations in the webway pushed Imperial organizational capabilities to their limits. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacement equipment had to be transported through tunnels where reality itself was unstable, making conventional supply chains impossible to maintain. The Sisters' null-fields proved essential for protecting supply convoys from demonic interference, their presence allowing cargo haulers and medical personnel to traverse sections of the webway that would otherwise be impassable. The establishment of fortified supply depots at regular intervals throughout the tunnel network required constant vigilance, as demons would attempt to corrupt or destroy these facilities whenever Imperial defenses showed any sign of weakness. The medical challenges encountered during webway operations reflected the unique nature of injuries sustained in combat against demonic entities. Wounds inflicted by demon claws or warp-touched weapons often refused to heal normally, becoming infected with supernatural corruption that could spread throughout a victim's body if left untreated. The sisters' null-fields provided some protection against this corruption, their anti-psychic auras helping to prevent the worst effects of demonic contamination, while injured personnel received medical attention. However, severe cases required evacuation to specialized medical facilities on Terra, where apothecaries trained in treating warp-related injuries could provide appropriate care. The psychological impact of extended combat in the webway created additional challenges for Imperial commanders attempting to maintain unit cohesion and morale. Even the most disciplined soldiers found their sanity strained by constant exposure to environments where the fundamental laws of reality no longer applied consistently. The sisters' presence provided psychological as well as physical protection, their null-fields creating zones where personnel could rest and recover without being subjected to the constant psychic pressure that pervaded the corrupted tunnels. Regular rotation schedules ensured that no individual spent more than a few days in the webway without relief, though the limited number of available personnel made such rotations increasingly difficult to maintain as the conflict dragged on. The strategic importance of specific locations within the webway network required the establishment of heavily fortified positions that could withstand sustained demonic assault while serving as bases for offensive operations. The primary gateway chamber, located directly beneath the Imperial Palace, became the focal point of Imperial defensive efforts. This massive space, originally designed to accommodate the webway portals that would connect Terra to distant worlds, was transformed into a fortress bristling with defensive weapons and protected by overlapping fields of fire from multiple Imperial organizations. The sisters established a permanent presence in this chamber, their null-fields providing a foundation of stability that allowed other forces to operate effectively despite the constant warp phenomena swirling around them. The discovery of intact sections of the original Eldar webway network provided both opportunities and dangers for Imperial forces operating in the tunnels. These areas retained their original protective barriers and remained relatively free from demonic contamination, offering potential staging areas for offensive operations against Chaos forces. However, the alien architecture and technology found in these sections posed their own risks, as Imperial personnel who attempted to interact with Eldar systems often triggered defensive mechanisms or became lost in spatial distortions that defied human understanding. The sisters' null-fields provided some protection against these alien influences, though their anti-psychic nature also prevented them from operating Eldar technology that relied on psychic interfaces. The role of the Sisters of Silence in closing minor warp rifts became one of their most crucial contributions to the webway defense effort. These tiers in reality, while smaller than the primary breach caused by Magnus, allowed constant reinforcement of demonic forces and created localized zones of extreme instability that threatened Imperial defensive positions. The sisters developed specialized techniques for approaching these rifts safely, their null-fields gradually compressing the tiers until they collapsed back into normal space-time. This process required precise coordination between multiple sisters working in concert, as insufficient pressure would allow the rift to expand, while excessive force could trigger catastrophic explosions that would damage surrounding Imperial positions. The Emperor's reliance on the Sisters of Silence during his vigil on the Golden Throne extended beyond their role in the webway battles themselves. Their null-fields provided essential protection for the throne chamber, preventing demonic entities from manifesting directly within the Emperor's presence, while he focused his psychic might on maintaining the barriers that held back the worst of the warp incursion. A rotating guard of 12 sisters maintained constant vigilance around the Golden Throne, their presence ensuring that the Master of Mankind could concentrate entirely on his psychic battle, without concern for physical threats to his immobilized form. The technical challenges of maintaining Imperial equipment in the warp-saturated environment of the webway required constant innovation and adaptation from Mechanicus tech, adepts supporting the operation. Standard power sources frequently failed when exposed to demonic influence, while mechanical systems could spontaneously transform into organic horrors or simply cease to function according to known physical laws. The sisters' null-fields provided zones where equipment functioned more reliably, making them essential partners for tech adepts attempting to maintain communications arrays, weapon systems, and life support equipment throughout the tunnel network. The intelligence gathered during webway operations revealed disturbing information about the long-term strategic implications of the breach. Demonic forces were not simply pouring through the gaps randomly, but were following coordinated plans designed to establish permanent footholds within the tunnel network. The discovery of demon-constructed fortifications and summoning circles indicated that chaos forces intended to use the webway as a staging area for attacks against Terra itself, transforming the Emperor's greatest achievement into a dagger pointed at the heart of the Immaterium. This intelligence prompted changes in Imperial defensive strategy, shifting from purely reactive measures to active offensive operations designed to clear corrupted sections of the webway and prevent the establishment of permanent chaos strongholds. The Warmaster's final assault on Terra marked the culmination of 7 years of civil war that had torn the Immaterium apart, and for the Sisters of Silence, it represented their most desperate hour. As Horus's massive invasion fleet emerged from the warp at the edge of the Sol system, the Sisterhood found themselves facing the prospect of total annihilation alongside the rest of humanity. Their numbers had already been severely depleted by years of constant warfare in the webway beneath the Imperial Palace, where they had fought alongside the Adeptus Custodes and Legio Cybernetica to contain the demonic incursion unleashed by Magnus, the Red's catastrophic breach. The few hundred sisters who remained operational on Terra represented the last remnants of an organization that had once numbered in the thousands across the galaxy. The strategic deployment of the remaining sisters across Terra's defensive network required careful consideration of their unique capabilities and the specific threats posed by the traitor forces approaching the system. Intelligence reports indicated that Horus had assembled not merely Space Marine legions and mortal auxiliaries, but also contingents of possessed Astartes, demon engines, and bound warp entities that would serve as shock troops in the coming assault. The Sisters' anti-psychic abilities would prove essential in countering these supernatural threats, but their limited numbers meant that each deployment decision could determine the fate of entire defensive sectors. The coordination between the Sisters of Silence and the Loyalist Space Marine legions defending Terra began during the initial phases of the siege preparation. The Imperial Fists, under the command of Rogel Dorn, had transformed the Imperial Palace and surrounding areas into the most formidable fortress complex in human history. The Praetorians' methodical approach to defensive warfare recognized the value of anti-psychic support, and he allocated precious resources to ensure that sister formations could be integrated effectively into his defensive plans. Small teams of sisters were assigned to critical positions throughout the palace complex, their null-fields providing protection against the psychic reconnaissance and infiltration attempts that preceded the main assault. The Blood Angels contingent, led by Sanguinius himself, brought a different tactical philosophy to the defense of Terra. The 9th Legion's emphasis on rapid response and close-quarters combat complemented the Sisters' anti-psychic capabilities perfectly, as their combined forces could quickly neutralize breakthrough attempts by possessed traitor marines or demon engines. The Angel's personal respect for the Sisterhood's sacrifice during the Webway War ensured that his warriors understood the importance of protecting their silent allies, leading to the development of specialized tactics that maximized the effectiveness of mixed formations operating in urban combat environments. The White Scar's role in Terra's defense focused on mobile operations designed to disrupt traitor supply lines and communication networks across the planet's surface. Jagatai Khan's warriors had maintained their traditional shamanic practices despite the restrictions of the Edict of Nicaea, creating potential vulnerabilities that enemy psykers might exploit during combat. The assignment of sister teams to White Scar's formations served dual purposes. Their null-fields provided protection against psychic attacks, while ensuring that the 5th Legion's questionable compliance with anti-psychic regulations did not compromise defensive operations. The cultural differences between the free-spirited White Scars and the disciplined Sisterhood created initial friction, but shared combat experience quickly forged bonds of mutual respect and tactical cooperation. The first phase of the siege began with orbital bombardments that reduced vast sections of Terra's surface to radioactive wasteland, while trader drop pods and landing craft delivered assault forces directly into the heart of the Imperial Palace complex. The Sisters found themselves thrust immediately into close-quarters combat against enemies whose corruption by chaos had transformed them into something far more dangerous than conventional space marines. Possessed Astartes demonstrated abilities that combined superhuman physical prowess with demonic powers, their bodies serving as vessels for warp entities that could manifest claws of pure energy, breathe streams of corrosive acid, or phase in and out of reality at will. The null-fields generated by the Sisters proved devastatingly effective against these possessed warriors, as the anti-psychic energy disrupted the connection between demon and host. Traitor Marines who had seemed invincible moments before would suddenly collapse in agony as their possessing entities were forced back into the warp, leaving behind merely human-level opponents that loyalist forces could engage with conventional weapons. However, the process of severing these demonic bonds often triggered violent psychic backlash that could injure or kill nearby Sisters, making such encounters extremely dangerous despite their tactical advantages. The deployment of demon engines by the traitor forces created new challenges that required innovative tactical responses from the defending Imperial forces. These mechanical abominations combined advanced technology with bound demonic entities, creating weapons platforms that could ignore conventional damage while manifesting supernatural abilities that defied rational understanding. Defilers strode through the palace corridors on mechanical spider legs, their battle cannons reducing defensive positions to rubble, while the demons bound within their hulls projected fear and madness into the minds of nearby defenders. The Sisters' null-fields could disrupt the demonic components of these engines, causing their supernatural abilities to fail and reducing them to merely mechanical threats that could be destroyed through concentrated firepower. The systematic nature of the traitor assault revealed the extent to which Chaos forces had prepared for this final confrontation. Enemy commanders demonstrated detailed knowledge of the palace's defensive layout, suggesting extensive intelligence gathering through both conventional and supernatural means. Traitor sorcerers attempted to establish summoning circles in captured areas, seeking to open permanent portals that would allow unlimited demonic reinforcements to pour into the heart of the Imperial defense. The Sisters' primary mission became the identification and destruction of these ritual sites, their null-fields preventing the completion of summoning ceremonies, while their flamers purged the corruption that lingered in areas where such rituals had been attempted. The coordination between different loyalist forces required constant adaptation as the battle progressed through the palace complex. Custodian Guard formations operated with their characteristic independence, their superior equipment and training allowing them to engage the most dangerous traitor champions in single combat, while Sister support prevented enemy psykers from interfering in these duels. The precision of custodian tactics complemented the Sisters' defensive capabilities, creating small but highly effective strike teams that could eliminate specific threats without requiring extensive support from other Imperial forces. The Imperial Fist's defensive doctrine emphasized the creation of overlapping fields of fire and mutually supporting strong points throughout the palace complex. Sister teams integrated into these defensive networks provided crucial early warning systems for psychic attacks, their null-fields detecting the approach of invisible demon infiltrators or possessed marines attempting to bypass conventional sensors. The methodical nature of Imperial Fist's operations suited the Sisters' disciplined approach to warfare, leading to highly effective combined arms tactics that maximized the defensive potential of limited personnel resources. The Blood Angels' more aggressive tactical philosophy created opportunities for offensive operations designed to disrupt traitor assault formations before they could reach critical defensive positions. Sister-supported Blood Angels strike teams launched rapid attacks against enemy command posts and supply depots, their combined abilities allowing them to penetrate deeply into traitor-held territory while remaining protected against psychic counterattacks. These operations required precise timing and coordination, as the Sisters' null-fields could interfere with the Blood Angels' own psychic abilities if not carefully managed during combat situations. The casualties sustained by the Sisters of Silence during the early phases of the siege reflected the intensity of combat and the specific targeting they received from enemy forces. Traitor commanders quickly recognized the threat posed by anti-psychic specialists and began directing concentrated attacks against identified sister positions. Chaos sorcerers employed long-range psychic assaults designed to overwhelm null-fields through sheer magnitude, while possessed Marines attempted to engage sisters in close combat where their enhanced physical capabilities could negate the advantages provided by anti-psychic abilities. The loss of even a single sister represented a significant reduction in the defender's anti-psychic capabilities, making casualty prevention a critical priority for Loyalist commanders. The arrival of traitor Titan legions on Terra's surface created unprecedented challenges for the defending Imperial forces. These massive war machines had been corrupted by exposure to chaos, their machine spirits replaced by bound demons that granted them abilities far beyond their original specifications. Chaos Titans could phase through solid matter, regenerate damage through demonic healing, or project devastating psychic attacks that could level entire city blocks. The sisters found themselves facing enemies whose null-fields could barely affect, as the sheer scale of demonic possession within these war machines exceeded their capacity to disrupt. The development of new tactical procedures for engaging demon-corrupted titans required innovation and desperate improvisation from Imperial commanders. Sister formations learned to target the specific components of Titan weapon systems that relied on demonic enhancement, their null-fields disrupting targeting systems and fire control mechanisms that had been augmented with warp-based technology. While they could not destroy these massive enemies directly, the sisters could reduce their effectiveness enough to allow conventional anti-Titan weapons to achieve killing hits against critical systems. The defense of the Eternity Gate, the massive portal that provided access to the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace, became the focal point of the entire siege, as traitor forces concentrated their efforts on breaching this final barrier. The gate's defensive systems included both technological and psychic components, creating a killing ground where the sisters' abilities proved essential for maintaining the integrity of the overall defensive network. Chaos sorcerers attempted to corrupt the gate's machine spirits and override its security protocols through psychic manipulation, while demon engines sought to physically batter down the massive doors through brute force attacks. The final phase of the siege saw the deployment of the traitor Primarchs themselves in direct combat against the palace's remaining defenders. These fallen demigods had been transformed by their allegiance to chaos, their already superhuman abilities enhanced by demonic gifts that made them nearly unstoppable opponents. The sisters found themselves facing enemies whose psychic might far exceeded anything they had previously encountered, as corrupted Primarchs could manifest abilities that overwhelmed even concentrated null-fields through sheer magnitude of power. The confrontation between Loyalist and traitor forces in the throne room itself represented the culmination of the Sisterhood's sacrifice during the siege. The few dozen sisters who had survived the weeks of constant combat found themselves serving as the last line of defense for the Golden Throne, their null-fields providing the only protection for the Emperor's physical form as he maintained his psychic vigil in the webway. The presence of Horus himself, now fully corrupted by the powers of chaos, created psychic disturbances so intense that several sisters collapsed immediately upon his arrival, their null-fields overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of demonic energy radiating from the War Master's transformed body. The near extinction of the Sisters of Silence during the Siege of Terra marked the end of an era for the organization that had served as humanity's primary defense against psychic threats since the Unification Wars. Of the hundreds of sisters who had participated in the defense of Terra, fewer than a dozen survived the final battles, their numbers so reduced that the organization effectively ceased to function as a coherent military force. The survivors bore witness to the Emperor's final confrontation with Horus and his subsequent entombment upon the Golden Throne, becoming the last living links to the Sisterhood's glorious past and the guardians of knowledge that would prove essential for the organization's eventual resurrection in the dark millennia to come. The aftermath of the Emperor's final confrontation with Horus left the Immaterium reeling from losses that extended far beyond the physical destruction wrought upon Terra's surface. The handful of Sisters of Silence who had survived the siege found themselves witnesses to a fundamental transformation of the realm they had served since its inception. The Master of Mankind, once the driving force behind humanity's expansion across the galaxy, now lay entombed upon the Golden Throne in a state between life and death, his consciousness locked in eternal battle within the webway, while his physical form required constant life support to maintain even the most basic functions. The immediate priority for imperial authorities became the establishment of new governmental structures capable of functioning without the Emperor's direct guidance. The formation of the High Lords of Terra marked the beginning of a bureaucratic revolution that would reshape every aspect of imperial administration, including the military organizations that had served the Master of Mankind during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. The surviving members of the Adeptus Custodes assumed responsibility for protecting the Golden Throne and the Emperor's physical form, while the Space Marine legions began the process of reorganization that would eventually see them divided into smaller chapters according to the principles outlined in the Codex Astartes. For the Sisters of Silence, these administrative changes represented an existential crisis that threatened to complete the destruction begun by 7 years of constant warfare. The organization's command structure had been virtually eliminated during the siege, with most senior officers killed in action and their fortress convent beneath the Himalayan mountains severely damaged by the fighting that had raged through the palace complex. The few surviving sisters possessed neither the authority nor the resources necessary to rebuild their organization from the devastation that surrounded them, leaving them dependent on the goodwill of other imperial institutions for their very survival. The assessment of the Sisterhood's remaining assets revealed the magnitude of the challenge facing any potential reconstruction effort. The primary fortress convent had suffered extensive structural damage during the Webway War, with entire sections collapsed or contaminated by warp energy that made them uninhabitable for normal humans. The specialized equipment that had taken centuries to develop and manufacture lay scattered across battlefields throughout the Sol system, much of it destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The carefully maintained archives that contained the accumulated knowledge of anti-psychic warfare techniques, recruitment protocols, and organizational traditions had been dispersed or lost during the chaotic final phases of the siege. The political climate following the heresy proved equally challenging for the Sisterhood's prospects of recovery. The new imperial administration viewed the Emperor's previous policies and institutions with suspicion, particularly those that had failed to prevent or adequately respond to the traitor uprising. The Sisters of Silence found themselves associated in many minds with the Edict of Nicaea and its enforcement, policies that had arguably weakened the Immaterium's ability to detect and counter the psychic corruption that had facilitated Horus's rebellion. Critics argued that the systematic elimination of Space Marine librarians had left loyalist forces vulnerable to traitor sorcery, while the resources devoted to anti-psychic warfare might have been better spent on conventional military preparations. The practical considerations surrounding the Sisterhood's future became apparent as the new High Lords began implementing comprehensive reforms across all imperial institutions. The Codex Astartes mandated the division of Space Marine legions into smaller chapters, reducing the concentration of military power that had enabled the heresy while creating more manageable units that could be deployed across the galaxy without threatening imperial authority. Similar principles influenced decisions regarding other military organizations, with preference given to structures that distributed capabilities rather than concentrating them in single institutions. The surviving Sisters of Silence found themselves scattered across Terra and the surrounding system, their small numbers making it impossible to maintain the concentrated formations that had defined their tactical doctrine throughout the Great Crusade. Individual sisters or small groups were assigned to various imperial organizations based on immediate needs rather than long-term strategic planning, effectively beginning the process of dissolution that would characterize the sisterhood's fate for the next 10 millennia. Some sisters joined Inquisition teams that were beginning to form in response to the need for investigating and countering chaos corruption, while others were attached to Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions tasked with recovering lost technology from battlefields across the galaxy. The integration of former Sisters of Silence into other Imperial organizations proceeded according to the specific needs and capabilities of their new hosts, rather than any coordinated plan for preserving the Sisterhood's institutional knowledge. The Officio Assassinorum expressed interest in recruiting sisters with particularly strong null abilities for incorporation into the Culexus Temple, recognizing the potential for enhancing their existing anti-psychic assassination capabilities. However, the Temple's rigorous selection criteria and specialized training requirements meant that only a handful of sisters possessed the specific combination of abilities and psychological profiles necessary for successful integration into their ranks. The nascent Inquisition proved more receptive to incorporating former sisters into their operations, as the organization's mandate to investigate and eliminate threats to imperial security aligned closely with the Sisterhood's traditional mission. Individual inquisitors began recruiting sisters as personal retainers, valuing their anti-psychic abilities and combat experience for operations against suspected heretics and chaos cultists. This integration occurred on an ad hoc basis without formal protocols or institutional oversight, leading to significant variations in how different sisters were employed and the resources made available to support their activities. The Adeptus Mechanicus showed particular interest in the technological aspects of the Sisterhood's equipment and training methods, seeking to preserve the knowledge accumulated over centuries of anti-psychic warfare research. Tech adepts conducted extensive interviews with surviving sisters, documenting their understanding of null-field generation, specialized weapon systems, and the physiological effects of prolonged exposure to anti-psychic energy. This information was incorporated into broader research programs aimed at developing new technologies for detecting and countering psychic threats, though the practical applications of this knowledge would not become apparent for several millennia. The abandonment of the Sisterhood's primary strongholds proceeded gradually, as imperial authorities determined that the resources required for reconstruction could not be justified given the organization's reduced numbers and uncertain future. The fortress convent beneath the Himalaysian mountains was sealed and declared off-limits to unauthorized personnel, its damaged sections cordoned off while the remaining intact areas were converted to storage facilities for other imperial organizations. The specialized training grounds, meditation chambers, and equipment manufactories that had defined the Sisterhood's institutional identity were stripped of valuable materials and left to decay in the darkness beneath Terra's surface. The dispersal of the Sisterhood's archives represented one of the most significant losses from an institutional perspective, as these repositories contained centuries of accumulated knowledge about anti-psychic warfare, pariah genetics, and the operational history of humanity's primary defense against supernatural threats. Some documents were transferred to the nascent Inquisition's archives, where they would eventually form part of the foundation for specialized anti-demon and anti-psyker operations. Other materials were incorporated into Adeptus Mechanicus data vaults, their technical specifications and research findings contributing to ongoing studies of human genetic variation and psychic phenomena. The majority of the Sisterhood's records, however, were simply lost during the chaotic reorganization that followed the heresy's conclusion. Administrative personnel lacked the expertise necessary to properly catalog and preserve documents written in the Sisterhood's specialized terminology, while the urgent need to establish new governmental structures left little time or resources for preserving institutional memories that seemed irrelevant to immediate survival needs. Entire libraries of tactical manuals, training protocols, and historical records disappeared into the vast bureaucratic machinery of the emerging imperial administration, their contents forgotten until they would be desperately needed millennia later. The fate of individual sisters varied dramatically depending on their specific abilities, personal connections, and the circumstances of their integration into other imperial organizations. Those with the strongest null-fields often found themselves recruited by organizations that valued their anti-psychic capabilities above other considerations, leading to careers as specialized operatives or researchers rather than traditional military roles. Sisters with extensive combat experience but weaker null abilities were more likely to be assigned to conventional military units, where their training and discipline made them valuable assets despite their reduced anti-psychic effectiveness. The psychological impact of the Sisterhood's dissolution proved as devastating as the physical losses sustained during the siege. The organization had developed a unique culture based on shared purpose, mutual support, and dedication to protecting humanity from supernatural threats. The sudden dispersal of survivors into unfamiliar organizations with different values and priorities created identity crises that many sisters struggled to resolve. Some adapted successfully to their new circumstances, finding meaning in continued service to the Immaterium, even if their roles differed significantly from their original training. Others became increasingly isolated and bitter, viewing their reassignment as abandonment by the very institution they had sacrificed so much to protect. The loss of the Sisterhood's recruitment and training infrastructure had long-term consequences that extended far beyond the immediate post-heresy period. The specialized knowledge required to identify and develop pariah abilities had been accumulated over centuries through careful observation and experimentation, much of which existed only in the memories of sisters who were now scattered across the galaxy. Without centralized facilities for training new recruits, the techniques for maximizing null-field effectiveness and integrating anti-psychic abilities into combat doctrine began to deteriorate through disuse and incomplete transmission to successor organizations. The technological capabilities that had distinguished the Sisters of Silence from other imperial military forces also began to decline, as the specialized equipment they had developed fell into disrepair without proper maintenance and replacement. The flamers, bolt pistols, and power weapons that had been optimized for anti-psychic warfare required specific materials and manufacturing techniques that were not widely understood outside the Sisterhood itself. As these weapons were damaged or destroyed during subsequent operations, they were typically replaced with standard Imperial equipment that lacked the specialized capabilities necessary for maximum effectiveness against psychic threats. The strategic implications of the Sisterhood's dissolution became apparent as the Great Scouring progressed and Imperial forces encountered increasing numbers of chaos-corrupted enemies across the galaxy. The systematic elimination of traitor strongholds often required operations against possessed space marines, demon engines, and sorcerer-led cultist armies that employed supernatural abilities as primary weapons. The absence of concentrated anti-psychic forces meant that loyalist commanders had to rely on conventional tactics, and whatever limited psychic support they could muster from sanctioned Imperial psykers, approaches that proved far less effective than the specialized anti-psychic warfare techniques that the Sisters of Silence had perfected over centuries of development. The few sisters who remained active in Imperial service during the Scouring found themselves in high demand, as their unique capabilities became increasingly valuable for operations against chaos forces. Individual sisters attached to Space Marine chapters or Imperial Guard regiments often became the decisive factor in battles against psychically enhanced enemies, their null fields providing the only reliable method for neutralizing supernatural threats that conventional weapons could not affect. However, the limited number of available sisters meant that most Imperial forces had to operate without anti-psychic support, leading to higher casualty rates and longer campaigns than would have been necessary with proper specialist support. The integration of former sisters into the emerging Inquisition proved to be one of the more successful aspects of the dissolution process, as the organization's mission aligned closely with the sisterhood's traditional role as humanity's defense against supernatural threats. Inquisitors who recruited sisters as part of their retinues gained access to anti-psychic capabilities that proved invaluable for investigating chaos cults, demon incursions, and other supernatural phenomena that threatened Imperial security. The sisters' training in silent communication and covert operations complemented the Inquisition's need for discreet and effective operatives capable of functioning in hostile environments. The knowledge preservation efforts undertaken by various Imperial organizations during this period had mixed results, with some aspects of the sisterhood's expertise successfully transferred to successor institutions, while others were lost entirely. The Culexis Temple incorporated many of the sisterhood's training techniques into their own programs, though their focus on assassination rather than battlefield operations meant that much of the tactical doctrine developed for larger formations became irrelevant. The Inquisition preserved some of the sisterhood's investigative procedures and anti-psychic countermeasures, adapting them for use in their broader mission of protecting Imperial security from internal and external threats. The gradual fading of the Sisters of Silence from Imperial consciousness during the early millennia following the heresy reflected both the practical consequences of their dissolution and the changing nature of the threats facing humanity. As the immediate crisis of the Scouring gave way to the longer-term challenges of governing a galaxy-spanning empire, the specialized anti-psychic warfare capabilities that the Sisterhood had provided seemed less immediately relevant than the conventional military forces needed to maintain order and defend against Xeno's threats. The institutional memory of their contributions to Imperial victory began to fade as new generations of administrators and military commanders focused on contemporary challenges rather than historical precedents. The scattered survivors of the Sisterhood continued to serve the Immaterium in various capacities throughout the early post-heresy period, though their numbers continued to decline through natural attrition without any systematic recruitment or replacement program. Some sisters lived for centuries due to life extension treatments or favorable genetic factors, maintaining their anti-psychic abilities and combat skills long after their original organization had ceased to exist. These individuals often became legendary figures within the organizations they served, their unique capabilities and mysterious backgrounds creating reputations that outlasted their actual lifespans. The preservation of the Sisterhood's legacy depended entirely on the initiative of individual survivors who recognized the importance of maintaining their specialized knowledge and traditions. Small groups of sisters who had been assigned to the same Imperial organizations began forming informal networks, sharing information about anti-psychic techniques and coordinating their efforts to train potential successors. These underground networks operated without official sanction or support, relying on personal relationships and shared commitment to their original mission to maintain continuity with their disbanded organization. The establishment of hidden caches throughout the galaxy became a priority for sisters who possessed access to specialized equipment or archival materials from their former organization. These secret repositories were concealed on shrine worlds, within abandoned space marine facilities, or in the depths of hive cities where Imperial authorities were unlikely to conduct thorough investigations. Each cache contained carefully selected items that would be essential for rebuilding anti-psychic capabilities if the need arose: weapons, armor, training manuals, genetic testing equipment, and historical records that documented the Sisterhood's operational methods and tactical doctrines. The selection of cache locations required careful consideration of long-term security and accessibility factors. Sisters chose sites that were unlikely to be disturbed by normal Imperial activities while remaining accessible to individuals who possess the necessary knowledge and authorization codes. Ancient shrines dedicated to the emperor's victory over psychic threats provided ideal locations, as their religious significance ensured ongoing maintenance, while their association with anti-psychic warfare made them natural gathering points for like-minded individuals. Some sisters established themselves as shrine keepers or religious hermits, using these positions to maintain surveillance over their hidden repositories while appearing to pursue conventional devotional activities. The recruitment of potential successors proceeded through careful observation and discreet testing rather than open solicitation. Sisters embedded within various imperial organizations watched for individuals who demonstrated unusual resistance to psychic influence or displayed the subtle signs that might indicate latent pariah abilities. This process required extraordinary patience and discretion, as revealing their true purpose could result in accusations of sedition or unauthorized military recruitment. Many sisters spent decades building relationships with potential candidates before revealing their true nature and offering specialized training in anti-psychic warfare techniques. The training programs developed by these underground networks necessarily differed significantly from the comprehensive education that had been provided at the sisterhood's fortress convents. Limited resources and the need for secrecy meant that instruction focused on the most essential skills rather than the full spectrum of capabilities that had characterized the original organization. Recruits learned basic null-field manipulation, fundamental combat techniques, and the principles of operating covertly within imperial society while maintaining their anti-psychic abilities. Advanced training in specialized weapons, large unit tactics, and the deeper mysteries of pariah genetics remained unavailable without access to the facilities and equipment that had been lost during the dissolution. The development of new operational doctrines reflected the changed circumstances under which these successor groups had to function. The massive formations and open military operations that had characterized the Sisters of Silence during the Great Crusade were impossible for small cells operating without official recognition or support. Instead, these groups adopted methods more suited to covert operations, infiltration techniques, sabotage operations, and targeted assassinations that could be accomplished by individuals or very small teams. The emphasis shifted from battlefield supremacy to discreet elimination of specific threats, requiring different skills and equipment than had been necessary during the Sisterhood's conventional military role. The coordination between different survivor cells required the establishment of communication networks that could operate securely across the vast distances of the galaxy. Sisters developed coded messages that could be transmitted through normal Imperial communication channels without attracting attention from security agencies, using religious terminology and commercial language to disguise their true content. These messages allowed scattered groups to share intelligence about emerging psychic threats, coordinate responses to major incidents, and maintain the sense of shared purpose that had defined their original organization. The networks also facilitated the exchange of personnel and resources when specific operations required capabilities that individual cells could not provide independently. The relationship between these underground networks and officially sanctioned imperial organizations remained complex and often contradictory. Some sisters maintained their positions within the Inquisition, Adeptus Mechanicus, or other institutions, while secretly supporting the preservation efforts, using their official roles to gather intelligence and resources that benefited the broader survivor community. Others operated entirely outside imperial authority, viewing the dissolution of their organization as a betrayal that released them from their obligations to the current administration. This division created tensions within the survivor community, as different groups pursued conflicting strategies for maintaining their anti-psychic capabilities while serving what they viewed as the Emperor's true interests. The emergence of new psychic threats during the millennia following the heresy provided opportunities for survivor cells to demonstrate their continued relevance to imperial security. Chaos cult uprisings, demon incursions, and rogue psyker incidents occurred with increasing frequency as the Imperium's expansion brought human populations into contact with dangerous warp phenomena across the galaxy. The discreet intervention of sister cells in these incidents often prevented minor problems from escalating into major crises, though their unofficial status meant that their contributions rarely received recognition from Imperial authorities. These operations served as training exercises for new recruits while validating the tactical doctrines that had been adapted for small unit operations. The investigation of psychic anomalies became a specialized mission profile for survivor cells, as their anti-psychic abilities made them uniquely qualified to explore dangerous sites and phenomena that posed unacceptable risks to normal Imperial personnel. Ancient battlefields where massive psychic conflicts had occurred often retained residual warp energy that could manifest as hostile entities or reality distortions, requiring careful study to determine appropriate containment measures. Sister cells developed expertise in identifying and neutralizing these psychic scars, preventing them from becoming sources of ongoing contamination that could threaten nearby Imperial populations. The recovery of lost sisterhood equipment and archives became an ongoing priority for survivor networks, as these materials represented irreplaceable resources for maintaining and expanding their anti-psychic capabilities. Battlefield salvage operations following major Imperial campaigns sometimes yielded specialized weapons or armor that had been abandoned during the chaos of the heresy and its aftermath. The identification and recovery of these items required extensive knowledge of the Sisterhood's equipment specifications and manufacturing techniques, information that existed primarily in the memories of surviving veterans who had used such gear during active service. The preservation of genetic knowledge related to the Pariah mutation proved particularly challenging, as this information had been closely guarded by the Sisterhood's senior leadership and research specialists, most of whom had been killed during the Siege of Terra. The few sisters who possessed detailed understanding of Pariah genetics found themselves responsible for maintaining breeding programs and identification protocols that could ensure the continued availability of suitable recruits for anti-psychic operations. This work required careful coordination with Imperial medical facilities and genetic research programs, often conducted through intermediaries who were unaware of the true purpose behind their activities. The establishment of safe houses and training facilities in remote locations provided survivor cells with the infrastructure necessary for conducting extended operations and preparing new recruits for active service. These installations were typically disguised as religious retreats, research stations, or commercial facilities that would not attract unwanted attention from Imperial authorities. The construction and maintenance of these facilities required significant resources and expertise, forcing survivor networks to develop relationships with sympathetic Imperial officials, merchant organizations, and technical specialists who could provide necessary support without compromising operational security. The development of new recruitment techniques reflected the changed circumstances under which survivor cells had to identify and train potential anti-psychic operatives. The systematic genetic testing and evaluation programs that had characterized the original Sisterhood were impossible to maintain without official Imperial support, forcing recruiters to rely on more discreet methods of identifying Pariah candidates. These techniques included observation of individuals who displayed unusual social isolation, resistance to psychic influence, or the ability to cause discomfort in nearby psykers. The identification process often required months or years of careful study before recruiters could be confident that a potential candidate possessed the necessary genetic markers for anti-psychic abilities. The training of new operatives proceeded according to modified protocols that emphasized practical skills over theoretical knowledge, as the limited time and resources available to survivor cells prevented the comprehensive education that had been provided at the Sisterhood's original facilities. Recruits learned essential combat techniques, basic null-field manipulation, and the principles of covert operations within Imperial society. Advanced training in specialized weapons, large unit tactics, and the deeper aspects of anti-psychic warfare remained available only to the most promising candidates who demonstrated exceptional aptitude and commitment to the survivor cause. The integration of new recruits into existing operational cells required careful evaluation of both technical capabilities and psychological compatibility. The isolation and secrecy that characterized survivor operations created unique stresses that not all candidates could handle successfully, while the anti-social nature of pariah genetics made team cohesion more challenging than in conventional military units. Successful integration often required months of gradual introduction to operational activities, allowing new operatives to develop the relationships and skills necessary for effective participation in covert anti-psychic operations. The coordination between survivor cells and legitimate imperial anti-psychic organizations created opportunities for mutual support while maintaining operational security for both parties. The Culexus Temple occasionally provided training resources or specialized equipment to survivor networks in exchange for intelligence about emerging psychic threats or assistance with particularly dangerous assassination missions. These relationships developed gradually through intermediaries and required careful management to prevent either organization from being compromised by association with the other. The benefits of such cooperation often outweighed the risks, as both groups shared common enemies and complementary capabilities that enhanced their overall effectiveness against psychic threats. The preservation of genetic knowledge related to the pariah mutation proved particularly challenging, as this information had been closely guarded by the Sisterhood's senior leadership and research specialists, most of whom had been killed during the Siege of Terra. The few sisters who possessed detailed understanding of pariah genetics found themselves responsible for maintaining breeding programs and identification protocols that could ensure the continued availability of suitable recruits for anti-psychic operations. This work required careful coordination with imperial medical facilities and genetic research programs, often conducted through intermediaries who were unaware of the true purpose behind their activities. The establishment of safe houses and training facilities in remote locations provided survivor cells with the infrastructure necessary for conducting extended operations and preparing new recruits for active service. These installations were typically disguised as religious retreats, research stations, or commercial facilities that would not attract unwanted attention from imperial authorities. The construction and maintenance of these facilities required significant resources and expertise, forcing survivor networks to develop relationships with sympathetic imperial officials, merchant organizations, and technical specialists who could provide necessary support without compromising operational security. The millennia that followed saw the gradual evolution of these survivor networks into something resembling a shadow organization operating parallel to official imperial institutions. The death of the last original sisters from the Great Crusade era marked a crucial transition point, as leadership passed to individuals who had never experienced the Sisterhood's glory days, but maintained their commitment to its anti-psychic mission. These second and third generation inheritors faced the challenge of preserving traditions and knowledge that existed primarily in fragmentary form, requiring them to reconstruct operational doctrines and training methods from incomplete sources. The development of new identification techniques for pariah candidates became increasingly sophisticated as survivor cells gained access to advanced imperial medical technology. Discrete genetic screening programs were established within certain Imperial Guard recruitment centers and Schola Progenium facilities, allowing trained operatives to identify potential candidates without revealing their true purpose. These programs required careful coordination with sympathetic medical personnel who could conduct the necessary tests while maintaining plausible cover stories for their activities. The identification of suitable candidates often led to their gradual recruitment through seemingly coincidental encounters and carefully orchestrated circumstances that made their eventual induction into survivor cells appear natural rather than planned. The relationship between survivor cells and the emerging Inquisition grew more complex as both organizations matured and expanded their operations across the galaxy. Some Inquisitors discovered the existence of these underground networks and chose to establish covert relationships that provided them with access to anti-psychic specialists for particularly dangerous investigations. These partnerships operated through elaborate systems of intermediaries and coded communications that protected both parties from potential accusations of unauthorized collaboration. The Inquisition's growing awareness of the systemic nature of chaos corruption made them increasingly receptive to working with any organization capable of providing effective countermeasures, even if such cooperation violated official protocols. The technological development within survivor networks proceeded along different paths than had characterized the original sisterhood, as limited resources and the need for secrecy prevented large-scale manufacturing programs or extensive research facilities. Instead, survivor cells focused on maintaining and gradually improving the equipment they possessed while developing new techniques for maximizing the effectiveness of standard Imperial gear when used by Pariah operatives. Modified bolt pistols incorporated specialized ammunition designed to disrupt psychic phenomena, while standard flamer fuel was enhanced with additives that made it more effective against demonically possessed targets. The emergence of new psychic threats during the Age of Apostasy provided survivor cells with opportunities to demonstrate their continued relevance while testing their evolved operational capabilities. The widespread civil wars that characterized this period often involved psykers and sorcerers who had gained positions of authority within various Imperial factions, creating targets that required anti-psychic specialists to eliminate effectively. Survivor cells conducted numerous assassination operations during these conflicts, their discreet interventions often preventing minor disputes from escalating into full-scale demon incursions that could have devastated entire sectors. The coordination between different survivor networks improved significantly during this period, as communication technologies advanced and travel between star systems became more reliable. Regular conferences were established at hidden locations throughout the galaxy, allowing representatives from different cells to share intelligence, coordinate operations, and maintain the sense of unity that had defined their original organization. These gatherings served multiple purposes beyond simple coordination, as they provided opportunities for advanced training, equipment exchange, and the preservation of institutional knowledge through oral tradition and carefully maintained archives. The recruitment of individuals from other Imperial organizations became increasingly common as survivor cells recognized the value of incorporating personnel with complementary skills and access to resources that pure Pariah genetics could not provide. Former Imperial Guard officers provided tactical expertise and knowledge of conventional military operations, while ex-Adeptus Mechanicus personnel contributed technical skills essential for maintaining specialized equipment. These recruits underwent extensive screening and gradual indoctrination processes to ensure their loyalty and compatibility with anti-psychic operations, though they rarely achieved the same level of integration as natural pariahs. The development of intelligence networks became a crucial component of survivor cell operations as they expanded their activities beyond simple threat response to include proactive identification and elimination of emerging psychic dangers. These networks incorporated sympathetic individuals throughout Imperial society, from low-level administratum clerks who could identify unusual bureaucratic activities to high-ranking military officers who provided advance warning of operations involving suspected psykers. The cultivation and maintenance of these intelligence assets required significant time and resources, but the information they provided often made the difference between successful operations and catastrophic failures. The establishment of training exchanges between survivor cells and legitimate Imperial anti-psychic organizations created opportunities for knowledge transfer that benefited both parties while maintaining operational security. The Culexus Temple occasionally provided advanced instruction in assassination techniques and specialized equipment in exchange for intelligence about Pariah genetics and null-field manipulation methods that could enhance their own capabilities. These exchanges were conducted through elaborate security protocols that prevented either organization from gaining complete knowledge of the other's operations, while allowing beneficial cooperation on specific projects. The preservation of historical knowledge became increasingly important as survivor cells recognized that their informal organization represented the only remaining repository of information about the original Sisters of Silence and their contributions to imperial history. Dedicated archivists within the networks compiled comprehensive records of the Sisterhood's activities during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, combining surviving official documents with oral histories provided by the last original members. These historical projects served both practical and inspirational purposes, preserving tactical knowledge while maintaining the sense of continuity that motivated continued resistance to the organization's official dissolution. The evolution of operational doctrine within survivor networks reflected both the changed strategic environment and the limitations imposed by their unofficial status. Large-scale military operations became impossible without official imperial support, forcing cells to focus on targeted interventions that could be accomplished with minimal resources and personnel. These operations typically involved the elimination of specific high-value targets, the disruption of chaos cult activities, or the containment of minor psychic incidents before they could escalate into major threats. The emphasis shifted from battlefield supremacy to surgical precision, requiring different skills and equipment than had been necessary during the Sisterhood's conventional military role. The development of new recruitment sources became essential, as traditional identification methods proved inadequate for maintaining the personnel levels necessary for expanded operations. Survivor cells established relationships with certain Space Marine chapters that had maintained their own anti-psychic specialists, creating informal exchanges that provided both organizations with access to additional pariah operatives when circumstances demanded. These relationships required careful negotiation to prevent conflicts between different organizational loyalties, while ensuring that both parties benefited from the arrangement. The integration of survivor cell operations with broader imperial military campaigns became increasingly sophisticated as commanders recognized the value of anti-psychic support for conventional forces. Individual sisters or small teams were discreetly attached to Imperial Guard regiments or Space Marine companies, conducting operations in areas where psychic threats were anticipated, their presence providing crucial protection against supernatural attacks, while their unofficial status prevented potential political complications. These attachments were typically arranged through personal relationships rather than official channels, creating a network of mutual support that enhanced the effectiveness of both conventional and anti-psychic forces. The technological advancement within survivor networks accelerated during the later millennia as they gained access to more sophisticated imperial manufacturing capabilities and research facilities. Improved null-field generators allowed for the creation of more effective personal equipment, while advances in genetic screening techniques made the identification of pariah candidates more reliable and efficient. These developments were typically incorporated into survivor operations through carefully managed technology transfer programs that prevented the revelation of their true source, while ensuring that anti-psychic capabilities continued to evolve in response to emerging threats. The relationship between survivor cells and the Adeptus Sororitas became particularly complex, as both organizations shared certain philosophical foundations and operational requirements. Some battle sisters demonstrated natural resistance to psychic influence that suggested latent pariah abilities, making them potential recruits for anti-psychic operations, while their existing training and equipment made integration relatively straightforward. However, the sororitas' strong institutional identity and religious devotion created potential conflicts with the secular mission focus that characterized most survivor cells, requiring careful evaluation of individual candidates before recruitment attempts were initiated. The return of Robute Guilliman to the galaxy during the closing years of the 41st millennium marked more than just the resurrection of a Primarch. It represented a fundamental shift in imperial military doctrine that would finally restore the Sisters of Silence to their rightful place within humanity's defense against the darkness. The Lord Commander's comprehensive review of imperial military capabilities revealed critical gaps in anti-psychic warfare that had developed over 10 millennia of institutional neglect, gaps that became increasingly dangerous as the Great Rift tore across the galaxy and unleashed unprecedented warp storms upon an already beleaguered Imperium. The Primarch's investigation into the fate of the Sisters of Silence began during his early months on Terra, as he sought to understand how the Imperium's military structure had evolved since his father's internment upon the Golden Throne. The discovery that humanity's primary anti-psychic force had been disbanded following the Horus Heresy prompted immediate inquiries into the current state of Imperial defenses against supernatural threats. What Guilliman found alarmed him profoundly: scattered survivor cells operating without official sanction, their numbers reduced to perhaps a few hundred individuals across the entire galaxy, their specialized knowledge fragmented, and their equipment deteriorating through lack of proper maintenance and replacement. The formal reconstitution of the Sisters of Silence required extensive negotiations between the Primarch's administration and the various imperial organizations that had absorbed or worked with survivor cells over the preceding millennia. The Officio Assassinorum proved particularly resistant to releasing the Pariah operatives they had incorporated into the Culexus Temple, arguing that these individuals had been extensively modified and trained for assassination missions that made them unsuitable for conventional military service. The Inquisition presented similar objections regarding sisters who had served in their retinues, claiming that their knowledge of sensitive operations made their reassignment a potential security risk. Guilliman's solution demonstrated both his political acumen and his understanding of the complex web of relationships that governed imperial administration. Rather than demanding the immediate transfer of all Pariah operatives to a reconstituted sisterhood, he established the Talons of the Emperor as an umbrella organization that would coordinate the activities of all forces directly responsible to the imperial throne. This structure allowed the Sisters of Silence to regain their institutional identity while maintaining operational relationships with other organizations that had benefited from their expertise during the millennia of official dissolution. The Talons of the Emperor encompassed three primary components: the Adeptus Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the Officio Assassinorum, each maintaining their specialized capabilities while operating under unified strategic direction when circumstances demanded coordinated action. This arrangement provided the Sisters with access to resources and support that individual survivor cells could never have obtained independently, while ensuring that their unique anti-psychic capabilities remained available for the most critical threats facing the Imperium. The Custodian Guard's role as the Emperor's personal protectors made them natural partners for the Sisters, whose null-fields provided essential protection for operations in environments saturated with psychic energy. The recruitment challenges facing the reconstituted sisterhood proved even more daunting than those encountered during their original formation on Terra during the Unification Wars. The Pariah Gene remained as rare as ever, occurring in perhaps one individual per 10 billion births across the human species, but the galaxy's vastly expanded population provided a correspondingly larger pool of potential candidates. The difficulty lay not in identifying suitable individuals, but in locating and recruiting them from among the countless billions of humans scattered across a million worlds, many of which had been cut off from imperial contact by the Great Rift's formation. The establishment of new recruitment networks required careful coordination with existing imperial institutions that possessed the infrastructure necessary for galaxy-wide personnel screening. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica proved particularly valuable in this regard, as their facilities for identifying and training psykers could be easily modified to detect individuals with anti-psychic abilities instead. The Schola Progenium contributed by incorporating pariah identification protocols into their standard psychological evaluations, allowing them to identify potential candidates among the orphans and foundlings who formed their primary recruitment pool. The integration of advanced genetic screening technologies developed during the millennia since the sisterhood's dissolution significantly improved the efficiency of candidate identification. Portable gene scanners could detect the specific markers associated with the pariah mutation within minutes, allowing recruitment teams to process thousands of potential candidates in the time it would have taken their predecessors to evaluate dozens. These technological advances were particularly valuable when screening populations on worlds that had been isolated from imperial contact for extended periods, as such isolation often led to higher concentrations of rare genetic traits through founder effects and genetic drift. The training protocols developed for new recruits combined the traditional methods preserved by survivor cells with innovations inspired by advances in imperial military doctrine and technology. The basic curriculum remained focused on developing null-field manipulation, close-quarters combat techniques, and the specialized skills necessary for anti-psychic warfare. However, the expanded scope of modern imperial operations required additional training in areas that had been less critical during the Great Crusade era: void warfare tactics, coordination with mechanized forces, and the use of advanced communication systems that could function reliably in the presence of strong null fields. The fortress convent infrastructure necessary to support large-scale training operations required extensive construction projects across multiple worlds within the Sol system and beyond. The original facility beneath the Himalayan mountains was restored and expanded, its damaged sections rebuilt according to improved designs that incorporated 10 millennia of advances in defensive architecture and life support technology. Additional training centers were established on Luna, Mars, and several heavily fortified shrine worlds, providing redundancy that would prevent a single catastrophic attack from crippling the Sisterhood's ability to train new recruits. The equipment development programs initiated during the reconstitution process benefited from both recovered archival materials and technological advances that had occurred during the Sisterhood's absence. The basic weapons and armor designs that had served the Sisters during the Great Crusade were updated with improved materials and manufacturing techniques, while entirely new systems were developed to address threats that had emerged during the intervening millennia. Null-field generators were miniaturized and made more efficient, allowing for the creation of portable devices that could extend a sister's anti-psychic influence beyond her natural range. The integration of Primaris Space Marine technology into Sisterhood equipment proved particularly beneficial, as the improved power armor systems developed for the new Astartes could be adapted for use by Pariah operatives. These modifications required careful engineering to ensure that the armor systems remained functional in the presence of null fields, but the resulting protection levels far exceeded what had been available to the original Sisters. The improved mobility and survivability provided by this equipment allowed modern Sisters of Silence to operate in environments and against threats that would have been prohibitively dangerous for their predecessors. The coordination between Sisters of Silence and Primaris Space Marine forces during the Indomitus Crusade required the development of new tactical doctrines that could accommodate the capabilities and limitations of both organizations. The Primaris Marines' enhanced physical capabilities and improved equipment made them formidable opponents for conventional enemies, but they remained vulnerable to psychic attacks that could bypass their armor and weapons entirely. The Sisters' null-fields provided crucial protection for Primaris formations operating against chaos forces, while their anti-psychic expertise helped identify and eliminate threats that conventional reconnaissance might miss. The deployment patterns that emerged during the early phases of the Indomitus Crusade reflected both the strategic priorities of the campaign and the limited numbers of available Sisters. Small teams of 3 to 5 Sisters were typically attached to Primaris Space Marine strike forces, their null fields creating protective corridors that allowed the Astartes to advance through areas saturated with hostile psychic energy. Larger formations of 20 to 30 Sisters operated as specialized response units, deployed to deal with specific threats that required concentrated anti-psychic capabilities to neutralize effectively. The liberation of worlds that had fallen under chaos influence during the millennia preceding the Great Rift's formation provided numerous opportunities for the reconstituted sisterhood to demonstrate their tactical value. Many of these worlds had been transformed into demon worlds, where reality itself had become fluid and unpredictable, making conventional military operations extremely difficult or impossible. The Sisters' Null-Fields could create zones of stability within these nightmare realms, allowing Imperial forces to establish footholds and gradually expand their control through systematic elimination of demonic strongholds. The encounter with the Death Guard on Ajax demonstrated both the effectiveness of modern sisterhood tactics and the challenges posed by enemies who had spent millennia adapting to anti-psychic countermeasures. The Plague Marines of Mortarian's Legion had developed techniques for operating in the presence of null-fields, using purely conventional weapons and tactics when their psychic abilities were disrupted. However, the Sisters' Flamers proved devastatingly effective against Nurgle's servants, the purifying flames enhanced by null-fields to burn away both physical corruption and demonic essence simultaneously. The coordination with Adeptus Mechanicus forces during the Indomitus Crusade created new opportunities for technological advancement and tactical innovation. Tech priests studying the Sisters' Null-Fields developed improved understanding of anti-psychic phenomena that led to advances in machine spirit protection and psychic shielding for Imperial equipment. These developments proved particularly valuable when operating in environments where demonic corruption could turn Imperial technology against its users, as null-field enhancement made mechanical systems more resistant to supernatural interference. The investigation of ancient battlefields and lost worlds during the Crusade revealed the extent to which psychic corruption had spread throughout the galaxy during the millennia of Imperial decline. Entire systems had been transformed into warp storms or demon worlds, their populations either killed or transformed into creatures that bore little resemblance to their human origins. The Sisters' ability to operate safely in these environments made them invaluable for reconnaissance missions and the recovery of critical intelligence about the scope and nature of chaos infiltration. The development of new tactical procedures for combating the various chaos factions required careful study of their evolving capabilities and weaknesses. The Thousand Sons had spent 10 millennia refining their sorceress abilities, creating new spells and summoning techniques that posed unprecedented challenges for anti-psychic forces. The Sisters adapted by developing more sophisticated null-field manipulation techniques that could disrupt specific types of psychic phenomena while leaving others unaffected, allowing for more precise countermeasures against different categories of supernatural threats. The encounter with the Emperor's children on Belial IV revealed how the followers of Slaanesh had evolved their tactics to account for anti-psychic opposition. The Noise Marines of the Third Legion had developed sonic weapons that could function effectively even when their psychic enhancements were disrupted, forcing the Sisters to adapt their own equipment and tactics to counter these new threats. The development of improved audio dampeners and sonic shielding became a priority for Sisterhood equipment programs, leading to innovations that benefited other Imperial forces operating against similar enemies. The coordination with Imperial Guard forces during planetary liberation campaigns required extensive training in combined arms operations that had not been necessary during the Sisters' original service period. Modern Imperial Guard regiments incorporated significantly more advanced equipment and tactics than their predecessors, including psychic support elements that could complement rather than compete with Sisterhood capabilities. The development of integrated operational procedures allowed Guard Psykers and Sisters of Silence to work together effectively, with null-fields providing protection for sanctioned psykers, while their abilities provided reconnaissance and communication support that enhanced overall operational effectiveness. The establishment of permanent Sisterhood presence on reclaimed worlds became a standard component of Indomitus Crusade operations, as the experience of previous campaigns had demonstrated that chaos corruption could return quickly if not continuously monitored and suppressed. Small detachments of sisters were stationed at key locations throughout newly liberated systems, their null-fields providing early warning systems for psychic phenomena, while their combat capabilities allowed them to respond immediately to emerging threats. These permanent deployments required significant resources and personnel, but the prevention of Ray corruption proved far more cost-effective than repeated liberation campaigns. The integration of new technologies into sisterhood operations accelerated as the Adeptus Crusade progressed and Imperial forces gained access to advanced systems that had been developed during the millennia of isolation. Improved Vox systems could function reliably in the presence of null-fields, allowing for better coordination between sisters and other Imperial forces. Enhanced armor systems incorporated adaptive camouflage and improved life support capabilities that allowed operations in previously inaccessible environments. Weapons systems benefited from advances in materials science and manufacturing techniques that improved both effectiveness and reliability. The growing psychic awakening that accompanied the Great Rift's formation created unprecedented challenges for Imperial anti-psychic forces, as the number of active psykers across the galaxy increased dramatically while their power levels often exceeded previous norms. The sisters found themselves dealing not only with traditional threats like chaos sorcerers and demon incursions, but also with newly awakened psykers whose abilities manifested unpredictably and often catastrophically. The development of new containment and suppression techniques became a priority, as conventional methods proved inadequate for dealing with psykers whose power levels exceeded established parameters. The coordination with the Adeptus Astra Telepathica in managing the psychic awakening required careful balance between suppression and utilization of emerging psychic talents. While the Sisters' mission focused on eliminating dangerous psykers, the Imperium's need for sanctioned psykers to maintain communication and navigation capabilities meant that potential candidates had to be evaluated and processed rather than simply eliminated. The development of screening procedures that could distinguish between salvageable and irredeemably dangerous psykers became a crucial component of sisterhood operations during this period. The investigation of the cicatrix maledictum itself required specialized equipment and procedures that pushed the limits of Imperial anti-psychic technology. The Great Rift represented a permanent tier in reality that defied conventional understanding, its effects extending far beyond simple warp storm phenomena to include temporal distortions, gravitational anomalies, and reality fluctuations that could transform matter at the molecular level. The Sisters' null-fields provided some protection against these effects, but extended exposure required rotation schedules and specialized medical support that strained available resources. The coordination with other Imperial organizations during the later phases of the Adeptus Crusade demonstrated the value of the integrated approach embodied by the Talons of the Emperor structure. Custodian Guard formations provided heavy assault capabilities that complemented the Sisters' anti-psychic specialization, while Officio Assassinorum operatives could eliminate specific high-value targets that required more subtle approaches than conventional military operations could provide. The combination of these capabilities under unified command created tactical options that none of the organizations could achieve independently. The establishment of the Adeptus Crusade's legacy infrastructure included provisions for maintaining and expanding sisterhood capabilities throughout the reclaimed territories. Training facilities were established on multiple worlds to ensure continued recruitment and development of anti-psychic specialists, while supply networks were created to support the specialized equipment requirements of sisterhood operations. The integration of these systems with broader Imperial military logistics required extensive coordination, but provided the foundation for sustained anti-psychic operations across the expanded Imperial frontier. As the Adeptus Crusade transitioned from active conquest to consolidation and defense of reclaimed territories, the Sisters of Silence found their role evolving from primarily military operations to a broader mandate that included investigation, containment, and long-term monitoring of psychic phenomena. The establishment of permanent monitoring stations throughout the galaxy provided early warning systems for emerging threats, while creating a network of rapid response capabilities that could address problems before they escalated into major crises. The reconstitution of the Sisters of Silence during the era Indomitus represented more than simply the restoration of a disbanded military organization. It marked the Imperium's recognition that humanity's expansion into an increasingly dangerous galaxy required specialized capabilities that conventional forces could not provide. The Sisterhood's integration into the Talons of the Emperor ensured that their unique abilities remained available for the most critical threats facing humanity, while their expanded recruitment and training programs provided the foundation for sustained operations across 1,000,000 worlds. As the 42nd millennium dawned and new threats emerged from the darkness beyond the Great Rift, the Silent Sentinels stood ready once again to serve as humanity's shield against the horrors of the warp, their null fields blazing like beacons of hope in an increasingly chaotic galaxy.